It's tier list time. I'm rather incoherent, and it's that time of year. Let's try to rank everyone. But as always, tier lists mean nothing without context, so let's set some ground rules. First of all, this is power rankings with taboo. I'm ranking how strong a character is, assuming the most up-to-date taboo list, so 2024 October. Second of all, and this is very important, this tier list is investigator relative. That is to say, how well you do against the campaign doesn't mean anything to me. And the reason I believe this is because I think every character consistently beats every campaign. Maybe like the 2 or 4 worst characters in the game might not reliably beat every campaign, but generally speaking, if I were to rank every character against the campaigns, I would have almost everyone in S, A, and B, maybe a couple characters in C, and no one in D. I would have an incredibly top-heavy tier list that required multiple things like A+ and B+, and I don't like that. I like greater stratification, so investigator relative, ranking them how good they are compared to who else you could have brought, compared to the other investigators, is what we're doing today. But power is not constant. What difficulty you're on and how many players you have on your team actually matters. I'm talking about standard difficulty 2 and 3 players. I never play true solo. These days I never play with 4 players either, sadly enough. And that means I'll be talking about 2-fisted and 3-player predominantly, with a slight lean toward 3-player, but you know, kind of both equally. Next up, this is going to assume that you have a full card pool, and it views parallel investigators as deck building options. I'm not going to rank full vanilla and full parallel, and vanilla front with parallel back, and parallel front with vanilla back. I can't rate 4 versions of the same character. It would be a tremendous amount of work trying to find out the perfect decks for all of them. And ultimately, I view parallel characters as deck building options. So whenever I rank any character with a parallel, I'll be ranking what I view as the very best version out of the 4 possible versions you can build. Which gets into my next point. I'm ranking these characters not just in terms of a general power level, but according to the power level of what I perceive to be the very best deck I can make for that investigator. The reason for this is I don't know how to rank characters when I start abstracting it out multiple levels. If I try to rank Daisy assuming that you've got a tome, I don't know what that means. I can tell you how good Opal Daisy is. I can tell you how good Grim Memoir Daisy is. I can tell you a lot about a bunch of different Daisy decks, but a generic concept of Daisy is not something I have in my head. So I am ranking what I have seen to be the best builds of these characters. I won't be showing specific deck lists on screen, but if you want to know what deck I'm talking about with great specifics, there is a link in the comments to a playlist containing literally 60 videos of me talking about every character these past few months, where I go through and I talk about what I think their best deck is, in part so that people can convince me otherwise, in part so that people can tell me about the things I've missed, and mostly as prep for this tier list because I fucking love thinking about the game. It's why this tier list is always bookmarked and always being updated and always getting posted to my Discord, and we yell at each other about the game after we finish our runs. We're still not done giving context for the tier list, just 2 left, we're almost there. I'm assuming every character's on an appropriate team. For some, that is basically not even an assumption. I'm like saying I assume that fighter Mark Harrigan's on the same team as a dedicated Clover. For other characters, say a parallel Zoe, I'm assuming that she's a fighter on a Bless team. That's notably more specific. And for other characters such as Bob Jenkins, I'm assuming he is the third wheel support Clover, where he's fitting onto a team where he doesn't have to be the main Clover and people care about the sort of support he's giving. I'm willing to be fairly specific, but not hyper specific. As an example of where I draw the line, I think Fighter Finn is a holy grail of deck building compositional goals, where you cannot play Fighter Finn with his current card pool in scenario 1. There's just not a good scenario 1 Fighter Finn. So if you can find something like a flex Mark Harrigan that starts off as a fighter and builds into a flex, then your Finn can start as a flex and build into a fighter, and you sort of role swap with your Mark over the course of a game. And that is something that is too specific, where very few teams are okay with you transitioning roles over the course of the opening scenarios, and I can't assume that. Which gets into my last point, that this ranking is about a specific deck to some degree in a vacuum, right? In specific team compositions, you can elevate characters higher than they are going to be on this list. That Fighter Finn I was just talking about might be the strongest Finn in a vacuum if you ignore the process of getting to scenario 5 and being able to play that deck. But if you do run specifically alongside a Flex Mark to allow you to do that, that might be stronger than any other Finn deck in a vacuum. Your team isn't something that weighs you down, it's something that elevates you, and the best part of Arkham Horror is trying to build teams where you lift each other up and you perform better than you individually would. That's the entire sales pitch for why Carson Sinclair is a really good character. Now, that's it for opening context, but I do want to talk about what the tiers mean. I mean, they are here on the side, which does sort of get the point across. S tier is overpowered, A tier is incredible, B is just strong, C is fine, I mean it, genuinely fine, but not impressive, and D is weak. However, I want to talk more specifically about what my criteria, what those words actually mean to me, and to do that, I'm going to rank one character in each tier, starting at S going down to D, and I'm going to show you what I think the weakest character in that tier is, essentially my gatekeeper for that tier. I'm going to describe what a character needs to do to get into S and give you a direct example of what I think the minimum power level in that tier is. Then go down to the next one, and once we get all the way to the bottom, at the bottom of D tier, I'll start circling back and I'll list every character in ascending power order and explain why I feel each character is better than the last. And when I say better than last, I do mean it. I am organizing left to right as strongest to weakest. The further to the right in a tier you are, the closer you are to falling out of that tier. The further to the left, the closer you are to getting into the next tier. However, this is apples and oranges. That the characters are not in the same role, it's sort of give and take. Think of everyone as being ranked plus or minus 2 or 3 spots, just because it's so hard to directly compare characters in this game where their functions are so inherently different. Like I said, let's start by assigning gatekeepers to each tier. At the bottom of my S tier, that's where I'm going to be ranking Winifred Habamok. There are a couple of things that I really need a character to do to be in my S tier. First, I disproportionately value scenarios 1 and 2. I think experience is so valuable and its value has only grown with the card pool to a point where, like, by scenario 4, I think every character is stronger than the campaign expects you to be. Scenarios 1, 2, and even 3 to a lesser degree are the ones where I really worry about having a serious obstacle, about stumbling in some way. And if you can clean scenarios 1 through 3 no problem, that probably implies that you're going to steamroll the rest of the campaign. So for getting into S tier, being good in those opening scenarios is very important. You also need to be not just Mythos resilient, but damn near Mythos impervious. Over this course of this video, I'm going to mention Mythos resilience a lot. That's not just soaking damage in horror, it's actually passing the test for things that will have gameplay ramifications, whether it be summoning a monster, adding a doom, just doing anything that makes the scenario harder. Passing the test is the best form of Mythos resilience, second only to making the test not happen in the first place. And if you can soak, that's great. Soak's always valuable. You'll fail tests, you'll auto-fail rotting remains, you need that. But being Mythos immune is more than just having good soak and infinite health. And the third thing needed to get into S tier, aside from just hitting the ground running, being good in your role, and being Mythos resilient, is you have to actually be way more than good in your role. You have to obliterate your role. Winifred Habamok, with the addition of Scarlet Keys giving Thieves Kit and Hemlock Veil giving Bullpup, gives you the ability to build a deck using sleight of hand where every single test you take is a foot test if it's during your turn. And if it's not a foot test, if you're doing a scenario test, thanks to Savant, anything you can do better, and a couple other cards like Unexpected Courage, you're able to just bulldoze through any test. You cycle your deck so quickly because every single test you take, you can double commit to as Winifred. You're able to do things to cheat out extra actions. Once you get more experience, you're using Ace in the Hole, taking 6 actions that all draw a minimum 1 card. Winifred cycles her deck at an unbelievably fast pace to the point where just using Sleight of Hand gives you unlimited resource on Thieves Kit and Bullpup. And you're very nearly doing that from scenario 1. When you're cycling your deck this fast, you're going to be able to use pretty much every single Mythos test. It's like, oh, Rotting Remains? That's fine. I commit Savant and another card for minimum 5 icons and pass the test. The only reason Winifred isn't higher in my S tier is because when we're talking about scenario 1, even scenario 2 to a much lesser degree, she is sort of struggling to start infinitely cycling her deck quickly. She has a few less versatile skills, a few less core assets, and it's just slightly harder in scenario 1 and 2 than you would like it to be. And she does rely on having certain cards in her hand, which can be awkward in the first couple of turns of a deck cycle. She's incredibly powerful, but not powerful enough to get higher in my S tier, because the characters that just turn the game off and break systems in half are the characters living in S tier. Winifred just gets there by being powerful, and it's insane that she's powerful enough to break into S with some of the stuff we'll see higher in that tier. And I've just realized I was supposed to be on this view. If you don't know who Winifred Habamok is, I'm sorry, but going forward, we'll have the cards on the screen. Moving on to A tier though, our next character is going to be not original Zoe Samaras, but parallel Zoe Samaras. Parallel Zoe Samaras is just barely in my A tier. She's a very good stat line for fighting, being able to easily pass half the Mythos test she takes to her forehead, having a good enough fist at 4 with access to Guardian. The Zoe I'm ranking specifically is half parallel with the parallel front and the vanilla back. If and when Runic Axe inevitably gets nerfed, half parallel may well be better using Blessed Blade 4 and Survival Knives. Right now I view them as largely similar, with a slight edge going to Runic Axe builds. But Zoe Samaras is just more Mythos resilient than most other Guardians, with access to 5 splash cards to help her Mythos resilience, in addition to having the ability to turn Bless tokens directly into Vicious Blows. She's just a rock solid Guardian fighter without any clear flaws. She does only have 2 foot, which can be a problem. There aren't that many cards that just fix your foot, but if you use your slash for Mythos Resilience, you can more or less solve the problem. She only has 4 fists. She's not doing anything particularly exceptional. She does need to be specifically in a blessed team. She's very, very good. However, she's nowhere near overpowered in my mind, and only a little bit better than most of the characters in B tier. As a comparison from S to A, typically characters in A are one of 3 things: more vulnerable to the Mythos than S characters, much weaker in scenario 1, or they simply aren't as proactively powerful as the S tier characters. In Zoe's case, it is mostly that last one. She's just good proactively. She's not snapping the pace of the game in half. Typically speaking, having unlimited vicious blows on tap, while it sounds really powerful, it doesn't really compare to Rex, because you need more clues all the time when you're playing the game, but having unlimited vicious blows will not matter on every turn the way a similar ability for clues would. Which brings me to my gatekeeper for strong tier. And NB as my gatekeeper for strong, they're still new in my mind, but apparently time gets weird as I get older. It's Kaimani Jones. When it comes to B tier versus A tier, again, it's really just degrees of the same thing. They either have much weaker early scenarios, or they have much weaker maximum output proactively speaking, or they're much less resilient to the Mythos deck. In Kaimani's case, it's that proactively, Kaimani's not the most impressive character in the game. Mythos-wise, they're a rogue. If you build them for big money, they will be more resilient, but Kaimani has a lot of things they need to spend their experience on, and typically I see Kaimani as a character that beats foot test and commits a guts to a head test, and they're good enough against the Mythos. They're not Mythos immune, they're not even super Mythos resilient, but they are good against the Mythos, is how I tend to see Kaimani's get built. And proactively, again, they're not crazy. They are able to deal with enemies in their own janky way with their ability. Gotta make that character card a little bit bigger. I hope that's big enough. But the big thing that makes Kaimani so strong in my mind is that because they're able to flex and kill enemies from the word go, and they're able to use Underworld and Market to tutor both lockpicks and thieves kits, even though the individual tempo of anything they're doing isn't particularly high in these decks, you can talk about Pilfer and Chuck Fergus being explosive and powerful, but it's a lot of experience. That's the main weakness of Kaimani, is so much of the deck cost experience. I can make an 80 experience Kaimani deck that's absolutely insane. The issue is the campaign up till that point. However, I can very quickly get to the point where I'm using stealth or blur to kill enemies, pretty much regardless of what their stats are. And then outside of that, I'm tutoring ways to find clues in my actions. And while Kaimani's very low on tempo, the deck I'm talking about compared to everyone else in B tier, they're good enough against the Mythos. No one in B tier is Mythos immune unless they're doing literally nothing else. But the thing Kaimani's doing is doing just good enough tempo, guaranteed, because they're starting with their ability and tutoring their clue finding, and that incredible reliability is just enough to get them into B tier in my mind. Coming down to C tier, we have Jenny Barnes. And I don't like Jenny, but I appreciate that if you feed someone an additional 40 experience over a campaign, and I've said experience trivializes every scenario after scenario 3, then that 40 experience is genuinely very broken. If you don't know what I'm talking about, Jenny Barnes is an alternate signature called the Green Man Medallion that allows you to, over the course of a scenario, spend resources at a rate of 6-to-1 to gain experience. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but that's the gist of it. And the result is that you get free copies of Double Double, free copies of Gios, just one free crazy expensive card, or at least heavily discounted every scenario. And it does not take long for that to add up to be incredibly powerful. However, Jenny's stat line is 3s across the board. That is an atrocious stat line. At level 0, she gets access to 5 splash cards, and while Dunwich Splash does an absolute ton, it doesn't do enough to fix 3s across the board, and those card slots are very tight. If I were ranking the original Jenny, I'd be putting her in D tier. It's Green Man Medallion getting her into C tier, and I can't overstate that she really does just hard carry in later scenarios. The Green Man Medallion is messed up. But she will be a D tier bottom rung character in those first couple scenarios when you're just left to deal with 3s across the board, and the advantage is that you have more resources in a class that already has more resources than anyone else. And lastly, for my bottom tier, at the very bottom of the tier list, it is Lola Hayes. Lola is a character, again, straight 3s across the board, but unlike Jenny, who has a signature that feeds her an entire extra character of experience over the course of a campaign, Lola has signatures that are essentially emergency cash level 2, but fast. That's a really good card. I don't think her signature's weak. I think the fact that her ability is actively designed to restrict her and make her weaker is the problem. Most of the top tier characters are good because of their abilities. I mean, hell, everyone I just put down as a gatekeeper was at least partially defined by their ability. Lola Hayes might have access to some of the most versatile deck building in the game, but she also has an ability that actively cripples her ability to combo those cards together in interesting ways. Her character front is the worst front in the game because it's the only one designed to be a limiter instead of a strength of the character. And combine that with bad soak and just how incredibly poorly cards combo together when using her ability, you end up with a character really devoid of clear strengths. She's meant to be an interesting puzzle to solve, but it feels like there's no clean solution, or at least there wasn't until TDC. I'm not going to get into Transfigure Lola here. I didn't really cover what made a character C tier. Again, it's just degrees removed from S tier. Each time you go down, you're getting worse in early scenarios, you're getting worse against the Mythos deck, and you're getting worse proactively. I think it's easier to see what a C tier character is working from the other end though. D tier characters are characters with clear problems. Their card pools fail to elevate them and their stat lines are unimpressive. These characters tend to either struggle against the Mythos and spend their whole deck fixing that, or struggle proactively and spend their whole deck fixing that, and then what you get at the end of it is a functional investigator. Despite my intense dislike for Lola, she will beat campaigns. I think she's the weakest character in the game, and I think if your team lost with Lola on it, Lola was not the sole reason you lost. But when I call a character in D tier weak, they tend to have bad opening scenarios, they tend to have Mythos vulnerability, and they tend to not be impressive proactively. When you move up to C tier, one of those things, usually just one, gets fixed. Maybe now with experience, they're going to be really, really good in every respect, but their opening scenarios are still bad. Maybe they're really strong proactively, but they're a glass cannon with bad Mythos stats. And now with our gatekeepers assigned, let's start getting into the list. Next up in my D tier, it hurts me to put her this low because I really wanted to think higher of her than this. We have Amina Zidane. Amina is a character where she was printed with a bunch of assets that didn't want to use her head, and at the point in time when it was just Scarlet Keys, I genuinely think Amina might have been the worst character in the game. Then Hemlock Veil came and printed Cat Mask, and getting +2 to head or fist twice every time you add a doom on something when your ability is add a doom to something is kind of insane. It lets you do a wonderful impersonation of a 5-head mystic. And I think Amina is like head and shoulders better than she was in Scarlet Keys. I think Cat Mask is a massive boon to the character, and it still only gets her to second place. I think that having to be so reliant on drawing Cat Mask, or even if you're running a Sparrow Mask, because of the way Limit 1 works, you cannot replace a mask with a different mask. It's like trying to replace Mr. Rook with Mr. Rook. You're just not allowed to do that. And that makes it really awkward to run something like a Sparrow Mask for consistency, because then if you have the Sparrow Mask in play, you might not be able to get it out of play to put the Cat Mask into play without running other cards like Sacrifice. And the more we talk about it, the more it becomes apparent that you're really all in on getting Cat Mask and making kind of a jank deck designed to specifically get Cat Mask and play a really awkward 5-head mystic. Amina works. Cat Mask did wonders for her, and she is so much better than she was. But you are so all in on getting Cat Mask and so much better with experience under your belt, so you have a baseline good number with your Mystic assets, that honestly, I cannot say Amina's any better than D tier. Maybe I'm being a little bit too mean to her, but the next couple of characters are all pretty hot takes, and I think you'll agree I'm being meaner to them. Before I continue, if I blow through any characters quickly, partly that's in the name of keeping the video short. This is gonna go on for a long time. But also it's because I've already talked for like 30 hours about the entire Investigator roster leading up to this. And before I get into the next couple of characters, I do want to say, there is no 5 characters in the game where I can say these are the worst 5 characters in the game that is not going to ruffle some feathers. Amina and Lola are honestly the 2 least controversial ones, and I wanted to put Amina higher than this. The next 3-4 characters are definitely gonna upset some folks. So let's just bite the bullet and get into it. Next up on the list, I've got Safina Rousseau. I think she's the 3rd worst character in the game. And I don't like saying that. She's the 2nd character I ever played. I loved her when I played her. She was interesting. She still is interesting. But the woman just does not have an ability. She might look like she has an ability, but not really. You take a slightly better opening mulligan, the cards underneath you being duplicated, there aren't cards that break the game from being duplicated. It's roughly equivalent to having 3 signatures that are like breaking and entering, Pilfer, and Faustian Bargain. And sure, having just cards you put in your deck as your signatures is better than the average signature. Average signature is not that great. Duplicating the cards in your deck, probably better. but you still have to eventually draw the card out from under Safina to get the duplicate value. The cards aren't balanced so precisely that duplicating them breaks anything. It just results in having slightly better signatures. Duplicating the stuff under you is not crazy unless you high roll when you hit like specifically ace in the hole, right? Whereas almost every other character in the game has way stronger abilities than that. I mean, hell, it's why I'm considering putting Amina above Safina, is because Amina's ability basically says you don't need to run economy cards and you have your economy completely unlocked guaranteed, right? Amina's ability is emergency cash for free every turn if you can manage the doom. Most characters who are good either in small part or entirely because of their ability. And Safina getting a slightly better mulligan is terrible. Combine that with her bad proactive stats, and sure, she's Mythos resilient, but the best Amina decks are these awful scrappy decks that are running like Drawn to the Flame and a space 6 value Read the Signs. And they just don't have impressive numbers. They don't have the consistency or the power of almost any other deck proactively. And like, if she could just more reliably do anything while being alive, she'd be much better. Once again, just like Lola, shout out to Transfigure, looking forward to seeing how Safina plays out next expansion. Moving on to Safina, we have another character that is going to ruffle maximum feathers. I've got a vendetta against this man. I don't like Bob. I've never liked Bob. I always want to like Bob. And, you know, it's this channel's meme. He's selling snake oil. It's not good. Don't buy it. I guess I have to talk about why I don't like Bob, but I've done it so much I don't even want to. The long story short, before I get started, TDC, Drowned City, it's looking like he's gonna get a lot better. The support for George Barnaby is looking like really meaningful support for Bob, and God, do I think he needs it. His card pool is just not very good at making use of book to find clues. His 3-foot, 3-fist is not very good at flexing to fight. He wants to play a support game, but if you are supporting your teammates by giving them your actions, then you have nothing proactive to offer yourself. And proactively, I just feel like he doesn't fucking do anything. Additionally, helping your teammates play their items, while it's generally a good ability, I find that every other support character blows him out of the water. If you compare him to something like a Harvey giving his draw away, a Carson Sinclair, even like a Carolyn or a Vincent, every other support character I feel does consistently either similar or much better things than Bob does in terms of support, while being massively better proactively. Coming over to our next investigator, continuing the Survivor Power Hour, we have Calvin Wright. I'm surprised he made it this far, because it would be fair to say I've got an axe to grind with Calvin too. Calvin's ability is that someday he'll have stats, which is a bad ability to have because most investigators start with stats. If he had like an insane card pool, maybe we'd have something going on here. But his card pool is actually surprisingly limited and almost directly power crept by Hanks, which is just funny. It's not necessarily important to Calvin. But yeah, there's just not really convincing reasons to play Calvin over most other investigators in most other circumstances. The reason he gets to be this high is primarily because of the value of taking any test at good numbers. There are some characters ranked much higher in the tier list where part of what they do is they can take any test. You have a locked door, no problem, unlocked. You have a scenario test to progress where I need to do like a 5-head test, no problem, I can do that too. The characters that can do literally any test, in addition to already being good, are incredible characters. Calvin is set up heavy in a way that's really unpleasant. He's not proactively super powerful. There's not a massive amount of action compression available to him in his more or less mono red card pool. But that ability to pass every test the scenario throws at you does, in my eyes, meaningfully elevate him above the people beneath him. And sadly, I'm not done shit talking survivors just yet. There's one more that I cannot bring myself to say is good, and that would be Rita Young. I really do want to like Rita. This is going to be a common theme in anyone I put in D tier. Generally speaking, with Investigator Relative, everyone beneath A tier hurts me. I want to put all of them higher because I understand that like they're D tier relatively, but my heart doesn't. My heart's like, no, Rita's cool. You won campaigns with Rita. But unfortunately, I just cannot say that I think what Rita's doing is better than other characters performing the same roles. I've never seen a flex Rita that looked functional to me. Pilfer is just too damn expensive and her economy is too weak to make it work. Then I look at Fire Rita, which is what her ability and stat line does tend to drive her towards, and I look at a character that's either wholly reliant on hitting Ornate Bow or wholly reliant on hitting Dirty Fighting. And yeah, survivors have good draw, but not good enough to be comfortable when I build my entire deck around one core card, right? Once Rita's set up, I have no issue with Rita. As of scenario 2, when you've spent your experience on whatever the core card you're going for is, once you're set up, like if you put me into a game and it's like the 5th turn in scenario 3 or later, Rita's probably in B tier. Like ignoring scenario 1, ignoring the opening turns. Once Rita is set up, she's probably in B tier. But almost every other character that's looking to play any sort of fighter is more consistently hitting the cards they need to do their job. And Rita does crazy stuff. Sweeping kick into dirty fighting is one of the strongest burst fights in the game. It's just her unreliability where so often you're like, yeah, I can evade guys. And it pushes Rita into wanting to play a flex game, but she's not very good at flexing. Her clue finding methods are just not very solid. And I've never been happy with how Rita performs. I'm hoping that someday soon I get to see a Rita that convinces me otherwise, but I just never have been happy with it. One thing I'll say a lot, especially when it comes to rogues, I'll mention it here with Rita, is that recency bias tends to color perspective a lot. People remember finishing a campaign with 8 scenarios of experience, and they just finished a game where they had set up for 5 turns with well-connected and black band and a million cards in play, and they were a god at the end of the campaign. They don't remember turn 1 scenario 1 nearly as clearly. And I value turn 1 scenario 1 possibly more than any other turn in the campaign. And with Rita, since the opening turns are the hurdle for her, the part that's actually hard, it's really easy for recency bias to make it look like the problem wasn't that big of a deal. And I feel like it fucking is. I do not trust Rita consistency at all. Continuing on through D tier, my next character is one of the newest characters. It is Wilson Richards. Wilson's a character that I really want to like, but I just don't feel like the tool card pool is very good. I didn't mention it when I was talking about Kaimani, but the tool card pool is fairly limiting. There's not a lot of particularly powerful cards in it. It's enough to do a job, and that's kind of all I can say for it. It's not particularly impressive, which means Wilson's ability ends up being not particularly impressive either. Being pigeonholed into using assets that are almost universally not the best way of accomplishing the thing that asset wants to do is kind of an unpleasant place for your ability to put you. Wilson can play a pretty alright flex game. You can also make him as dedicated fighter or dedicated cleaver. I tend to believe he's better as flex, but basically everyone, like when I made the Wilson video, I think almost unanimously people were like, why are you being so nice to Wilson? And I was like, shit. Maybe he doesn't deserve to be in C tier. He's one of the characters where community consensus convinced me. I was like, oh, all right. Maybe he's worth giving credit for. And then as time has passed, every time I've looked back at Wilson, I'm like, yeah, I'm too nice to him. I want him to be good, but having an ability that forces me to use Sledgehammer or Chainsaw instead of any other fight card to fight at base 4, it's just unimpressive. It locks you into a narrow range of cards that are not the best at doing the jobs they do. And his card pool, because it's just tools, is not very good. I know it's not just tools, it's also improvised and or upgrades, most of that's still below. And moving on to the next character, this one hurts me a lot because I personally really like the idea that Sister Mary gets out of D tier. And for the longest time in my tier list, she did get out of D tier until I remembered, and by remembered, I mean had my community spell it out to me during the Diana video that Deny Existence got reworked. See, the niche for Sister Mary is that compared to other Guardians with 4 fists, yes, 3 fists is a problem. It's an obstacle you have to overcome and commit deck slots and play actions to solving and spend experience on, and that's all an issue. But she also has way better Mythos stats, access to Warder Protection and Deny Existence, and Promise of Power. It is much better against the Mythos phase than a Tommy or a Roland. And for a long time, I believe Sister Mary was better than them because of this. However, with the taboo that changes Deny to essentially not work on weaknesses, there are some other cases that it doesn't work on either, but that's the big one. Now, when you put Sister Mary in a Bless team, you know, the thing you obviously want to do with a Sister Mary, you eventually get rid of all the blesses and turn them to curses, or you eventually die. Those are your 2 options, right? So she ends up being the worst at enabling Bless out of every Guardian fighter now, because every other Guardian can just run a backpack deck with an Ancestral token, and their weakness doesn't ruin the whole team's game plan. Losing that niche where you effortlessly enable the Bless build for pretty much everyone is kind of a big deal to me. And being arguably the worst Bless fighter when she was made to be the Bless fighter is not good. I do still argue that 3 Fist is easy to overcome and she is more Mythos resilient in very meaningful ways than other fighters, but I would rather just play a main fighter that didn't have to overcome 3 Fist. And previously her niche as the best Bless fighter, second best after Parallel Zoe came out, at least made it so that having to overcome your 3 Fist wasn't worth doing, and then the additional Mythos resilience got her into C tier. But with the Deny taboo, I just really cannot justify getting Sister Mary out of my D tier. I don't know what team I have any compelling reason to pick Sister Mary for anymore. Moving on, still in D tier, we have Parallel Jim Culver. And when I talk about Parallel Jim Culver, I am talking about the full Parallel. I don't like curse builds. I'm just gonna say that now. I think Rod of Carnimagos is incredible, but when you're using Armageddon and Rod of Carnimagos, and you're essentially, I mean, you're always rolling dice to do anything in Arkham, but rolling dice to determine the outcome of your dice roll and see how much damage you'll actually do is something that I, as a player, find viscerally unpleasant. This may be causing me to underrate Parallel Gem because I'm looking at non-curse versions of Gem because I do not trust curse archetypes to work for me when I play them, because that's not how RNG has ever gone for me or my teammates when we were playing Armageddon. Additionally, while his ability does seem sick as hell, giving you an absolutely wild number of charges, I tend to find that most Mystics have enough charges to complete the scenario without even needing something like Uncage the Soul 3 for additional charges. So I don't actually value his ability all that highly in this form either. I do think it's good, but it's not as good as it might seem at first glance. I think there's some very cool decks you can do where you're not really playing a curse build particularly well, but you are putting curses in the bag, which is helping an all McBride 6 cent setup. I think there's a lot going on in Parallel Gem in terms of just generic random value coming from the Beyond deck. And he's one of the first characters in D tier where genuinely he's just not that good. He's almost fine. But it's not that Gem has weaknesses that make me hold Gem down, it's just that he's not particularly got a lot of strengths that impress me. And in that same boat, a character I may well be underranking, but I don't find myself impressed by Marie either, unfortunately. Marie is one of those characters with a bad set of deck building rules that essentially only serves to limit her, but her stat line is not impressive. Her ability to get one more action on a spell is really good, but the ability to reliably have Doom on your cards is not something that is a given. Other characters, particularly Dexter and Amina, I feel play the Doom archetype better than she does because they're better at generating and managing Doom. Whereas with Marie, I feel like if I want to play into Doom, I have like at least an 8 experience tax I have to deal with immediately to get Sin Eater and El Rubash and cards to help deal with the Doom. And it's just very frustrating in my experience trying to play Doom to Marie, where all of my power comes later, and once I actually get to have that power in scenarios 3 and on, I'm not even that amazing. She does have some cool stuff with deck building where she has access to Archaic Glyphs and Astronomical Atlas, but with Astronomical Atlas builds, I don't find that her base ability to investigate with Book with her limited access to secret cards is actually that good. And with Archaic Glyphs, it's the same thing I just said with Doom, where sure, I'm doing okay after scenario 3, well, it's more like scenario 2 with Archaic Glyphs. But yeah, while I'm doing good with the Archaic Glyphs, I'm still having to have a bad scenario 1 to get there, and I'm committing my whole deck to this one card without a great way to tutor the card as well. I don't have the best draw in the world. Like, it's not bad. I'm not pretending the Archaic Glyphs build is bad. It's probably the best thing she can do, but it's always a bad scenario 1, always a lot of mandatory experience, and I just do not find myself impressed by any build of Marie. And that'll be the end of our D tier. Moving on, I think everyone else is at least comparatively fine. With characters in weak, I can probably find a direct reason to compare them to someone else and play that person instead. With characters in C, they might be doing stuff no one else really does as well. For instance, no one else is playing a 100 experience deck. And next up in C tier, we have Parallel Roland Banks. I am talking about full parallel flex Roland here. I have a lot of experimentation I need to do with Roland. He's a character where I'm looking to play a ton more of him once we get to Drowned City and I can see what the cards are. But the issue with vanilla Roland almost entirely boils down to, hey, this 5 horror with random trauma for my weakness is kind of a problem. Parallel Front gives you access to an additional 3 horror soak, and that is enough to really meaningfully incentivize running Parallel Roland. He's got some very unique, powerful things as a flex character. Putting Flare under stick to the plan stands out as one of the strongest ones, but he's able to just play a solid enough flex game and be resilient enough against the Mythos phase, just barely, to get into C tier. And the argument basically comes down to, yeah, his Mythos resilience is trash still, but he's got enough health and soak to survive it. He has ways to pass some Mythos tests and fix his cards. And most importantly, his scenario 1, he just actually does something. There are so many characters in D tier. Sister Mary is a great example of this, Calvin Wright too, where in the opening turns of scenario 1, they just sort of screw around and don't do anything, and it's awful. Parallel Roland has a much higher level of tempo than a lot of characters lower than him. I would really only say that the Forehead Mystics at the top of C are competing with them, and I'm more comfortable with Flex Roland than I am with those characters in the opening scenarios. I think these characters definitely outstrip him later on, but again, I think once you have a lot of experience on your team, you're gonna outstrip the campaign by so much it hardly matters. And I do want to be clear, I do value strength later in campaigns. That's why Ginny's not in D tier. I just value it less by a lot than strength early in campaigns. And next up in C tier, we have another Guardian. We have Tommy Muldoon, the rookie cop. Tommy's a character that I want to like more than I do. In terms of Mythos resilience, his access to survivor cards helps a little bit. In terms of draw, his access to survivor cards helps a lot. And the big thing is that while he's not the best at passing a Mythos test, he is easily able to soak through every Mythos test. Survivor is just one of the generically stronger card pools in the game. What it lacks for in action compression, it makes up for in literally everything else. So if you get pretty much anything outside of Survivor for your action compression, and as a Guardian fighter, he has access to the best fighting tools in the game, then that tends to mean that Survivor is the best secondary card pool you can have. That card pool does a ton to elevate Tommy. If Becky were actually a good weapon, or if he were able to play a tank Tommy that utilized allies really proactively and aggressively from turn 1, he would rank much, much higher on the list. However, Becky is generally speaking worse than pretty much every other in-game fighting option, even mid-game fighting options, because, you know, you just buy your weapon first, you have it in scenario 3 guaranteed. And his signature weakness makes it really, really hard because there's no way to tutor it out, no way to reliably force that to happen immediately, to play the tank Tommy of my dreams and actually buy the Starred Hero. Once again, shout out to Transfigure, because suddenly there's a way to do that. And moving on from Tommy, we have another fighter that is just going to survive and do their job. And I think this one is kind of what I'm torn on in exactly what order they should be placed. We have Hank Samson. Hank Samson is nothing if not reliable. With an entire second stat pool like a two-phase boss, base 3/3 in his Mythos stats, going up to 6 Fist once he dies, quote unquote dies. He's very Mythos resilient. He's in Survivor. You can use Sparrow Mask to pass almost any Mythos test with a little bit of help. Staple on access to things like Lucky, Jessica, Pete. You're able to make Hank invincible with literally minimal effort. However, what you can't make Hank do is consistently, repeatedly deal more than 2 damage. There's really not a way to do that in his card pool. And you don't necessarily need to do that. Hank will be good enough if the rest of your team is looking to help with fighting. But the issue is, you can have fighters on your team that will just kill all the enemies on their own. They don't need you to help them. And Hank's not helping you in exchange. He's not offering a ton of team support. He's not offering to find a lot of clues. He's just fighting guys, but he's not able to necessarily deal with every enemy on the map on his own in the way that better fighters can. Even someone like a Tommy is much more likely to deal with a constant onslaught of 4 health enemies than Hank. And yes, there are campaigns where there will never be a constant onslaught of 4 enemies. There are also scenarios where there are so many enemies and Hank really does get overwhelmed. And if he had access to just a couple more events that reliably dealt 3+ damage, I think he might be able to get meaningfully higher on this tier list. But as it currently stands, there's just not quite enough action compression or value outside of fighter for me to place Hank much higher than low to mid C tier. Oh, how the mighty have fallen. This one hurts me. I don't like putting Vincent here. But next up on the tier list, we do have Vincent Lee. Vincent has issues. 1 foot seems like it should be number 1 on the list. His Mythos stats are a total of 4. How are you doing, Joe Diamond? I know those numbers. Not this specific configuration, but total 4 Mythos is pretty damn rare. That's horrifically bad. I don't think anyone has a 1 and a 2, so this is tied with Joe at worst Mythos stats in the game. Not counting Calvin, I suppose. The 1 in foot's honestly not the problem, because Vincent Lee is able to run Jessica Hyde, who will heal herself every turn, giving you unexpected courage every turn. You can make an argument that Vincent Lee has, 5 and 3 in his Mythos stats. The issue with Vincent Lee is if you fit healing in your deck and you fit things like Jessica in your deck and you're trying to flex with your fist, you are cutting cards somewhere. Whatever Vincent deck you make, you are cutting something you really desperately wanted. He wants to do too much all at once. He wants to fix his foot. He wants to do proactive clue finding things with his book. He wants to fight with his fist. He wants to heal people. He has to deal with his weakness, which is random mental trauma if you let it die. And pretty much the only clean way in the game to deal with the guy is to buy a surgical kit for 3 experience and then pay it for however many resources, right? And you really don't want surgical kit in your deck, but you do have to deal with the, what's his name? Innocent bystander. So Vincent just has too much he wants to do all at once, and it results in always feeling like you're missing a couple of core cards. I feel confident that you can build a Vincent better than I've seen and put him higher than this, but God, I haven't been able to do it. I have been consistently frustrated playing Vincent, and that has been the experience of other people at my table as well. And I do want to say, like, as much as I'm shit talking Vincent, he is a seeker with 4 book. He is able to use a flex runic axe to kill a guy with 3 health and get 3 clues at one time. The stuff he's doing well, he's doing incredibly. When you're like, oh God, I'm dying to damage on your 5 health mystic, And Vincent's like, ha, no, you're not. Here's an unexpected courage. You feel on top of the world. Vincent has really good things going for him. But when you're using unexpected courage to fail a foot test by 1 instead of by 3, hemorrhaging damage, taking random mental trauma, and suddenly realizing that everyone else has left you behind because you've cut Pathfinder and Shortcut from your deck so that you could fit your healing cards, that doesn't feel good. Vincent has really high highs and really low lows, and I just haven't seen a version of Vincent that manages to keep those highs without, making the lows worse. And the versions of Vincent that mitigate those lows are versions of Vincent that also don't have the highest highs. And at the end of it, I find him a character that I will be playing again, that I will keep watching when people post cool decks for him, and hopefully someday get him out of C tier, because I used to think much more highly of this based on what appears to have been a very good variance. A character that's almost the exact opposite in terms of how I feel about her, but right next to Vincent all the same, is Patrice Ha. Patrice is a gimmick character, draw 5 cards every turn, and see what you can do with them. Her stat line's not great for a survivor, but it is pretty good even if you only have Mystic 0 to 2, that's still enough to reliably capitalize on head, and you can just tend to play a pretty smooth, intuitive, and fun game when you're playing Patrice. However, the total value of what you're doing proactively is nowhere near as impressive as many other characters. In terms of Mythos resilience, she's pretty damn resilient to the Mythos. It's just proactively, she's not incredible. Scenario 1, because you have a 42 card deck, the average quality of your cards goes down a lot until you've gotten some experience to upgrade your core cards with. There are just so many 1 experience cards where as you add them to your deck, the average card quality skyrockets. And it's just that in scenario 1, when you're using these mystic assets and they don't have bonuses on them yet, so you're at base 4 head before you use skills, you haven't bought your second cornered. If in the thick of it gave 4 starting experience, Patrice would be in B tier. I'll just say that now. Also, I'm not covering specific cards in very much detail at all, aside from constantly shouting out Transfigure that's coming up in TDC because it's such a cool card. However, I will say that virtually every non-mystic character other than Mark Harrigan, I think is best off running in the thick of it. I view it as a notable outlier. And it's really just that in scenario 1, Patrice is not all there yet. Even in scenario 2, she's missing some stuff she'd really like. But in scenario 1, where, it's, in my opinion, scenario 1 tends to be the hardest scenario in a campaign, or at least one of the hardest scenarios in a campaign. And it's the one where the experience you get matters the most. Experience in scenario 1 is used 7 times. Experience in scenario 6 is used twice. So a lot of Patrice only making it to mid-C is just that in scenario 1, she doesn't have everything she needs. She's missing a lot of core pieces, and I really fucking value scenario 1. And originally, I planned to rank Alesandra higher than Patrice. That's where she was on my tier list until just now, and I'm putting her under Patrice. I have to somewhat rank Alesandra, like talking hypothetically about decks I haven't seen, because I think very adamantly now that Power Word in Alesandra is a trap post-Taboo. The fact you have to build your whole deck around managing to consistently pass a 3-head test is a problem in a character with base 3 head. Because yes, with Find Close, you're up 2 already, but then you have to find Power Words and Find Close, and up 2 is not good enough. A lot of the time you see a -3 with a penalty on your symbols. So you need, realistically, to be at least +3, ideally +4. And my experience with Alesandra has been that Power Word is incredibly powerful after like scenario 3, and if you happen to draw your cards in the right order, which I did. But I cannot shake the feeling it was good variance and that the opening scenarios are more important, and I should be playing a deck that's better in the early scenarios, that it forgoes Power Word for other more temporary uses of her ability. If anything, I think Alesandra might be a character I'm grievously underrating, but as I say that, I look at her next to Patrice, Vincent, and Hank. I'm like, yeah, but they're good characters. They beat campaigns, and I think Alesandra might be in the same boat, where Alesandra does have things that she can do that no one else can do with her unique parlay tools. She has a rock solid stat line, but at the end of the day, I'm not sure that she does anything that's particularly impressive to me. And unless you're playing Big Money, which is a radically expensive deck, you're not Mythos immune, you're just good to it. I think a huge part of it with me for Alesandra is that no matter what deck I'm building, her opening deck's a little bit rough. She has very core experience, and then the things she does with the experience aren't even that impressive. And if that sounds like it's not a good argument for you, then I think we just don't see eye to eye on how we're going to analyze the game. And we're going to circle back to this argument about how important it is for me that you're strong immediately in a couple of spots. Because that's my main argument against Alesandra, and we're going to come to someone who is a much hotter take than Alesandra for the exact same reason very shortly. But for now, let's just move on to the next spot, and that is maybe contentious a little bit. It's Carolyn Fern. I genuinely don't find Carolyn Fern that impressive. She has very cool stuff she can do with field agents and agent souls. She has access to some pretty powerful clue compression, and she can have it pretty much in Scenario 2, Scenario 3 at the absolute latest, thanks to the trick with a Shrewd Analysis. That's the name of the permanent card that gives you a random upgrade to a research card. Because Carolyn only has one version of Ancient Stones, it locks in just 2 for the price of 1. A lot of the reason that Carolyn only makes it to C for me just comes down to me not being particularly enthused by the type of support she offers. Realistically speaking, I don't think of many characters aside from like vanilla Roland as being terrified of horror damage. And if you are scared of horror damage, it tends to imply you're bad at head, and the worst thing a head test can do is not deal horror damage to you. It's cost you an action every turn with Frozen in Fear. It is a head test that does anything to make the game harder for you or your whole team. It is not just horror damage. Horror damage can be soaked, it's not a big issue. And the resources are something that I just don't view as particularly valuable. I think one Crack the Case or one Faustian bargain tends to be all the team support economy you need to set someone on the right course for the rest of a scenario. And what Carolyn offers her teammates is far more than they will ever need, and it tends to be used to allow her to play more expensive cards, which is good because she wants to use it on herself for field agents anyway, but still. And at the end of the day, I find her playing like a perfectly good Kluber game that is moderately Mythos resilient thanks to cards like Promise of Power, but it's not particularly Mythos resilient, it's just very resistant to specifically horror damage. And I don't view her as having great ways to make use of that additional resource that she's feeding herself. Which brings me to my next character, a character that I really wish I could place higher but kind of want to place lower. It's Joe Diamond. Joe Diamond's Mythos stats are awful, the worst in the game, as I was alluding to a second ago. 4 Fist, 4 Book is also a rough place to live, because with his color access of Seeker and Guardian, he tends to want to fight by using assets. And sure, there are some ways to get clues in Seeker that don't involve using assets, but typically you want stuff like allies and magnifying glasses that are going to boost your book so that when you commit deduction level 2, you actually pass by 2. So you end up finding Joe decks that are built as Kluver and don't use their fist, or built as Fighter and don't use their book very well. They'd use it better than a Kluver uses their fist for sure. Or you find Joe decks that are built as Flex and have issues. I think there are Joe decks that are very nearly breaking into B tier. Joe's a character that I'm always attracted to, always trying to make work. There's someone at my table who's obsessed with the guy, or was obsessed with the guy. He's moved on to new obsessions. But I think the Flex builds of Joe Diamond, utilizing the new Ravenous Myconid and Unearth the Ancients as ways to mitigate the Mythos and ways to generate a ton of draw and tempo for themselves, are really, really interesting tools to sort of mitigate the downsides of Joe. When you use Unearth the Ancients level 2 to give yourself Lab Assistant and Eon Chart, that helps to mitigate any horror damage or even asset removal that comes your way. It's massive tempo gain that helps you deal with the fact you are likely a more setup heavy deck. When you use the new Ravenous Myconid, and you can argue anything involving Ravenous Myconid is going to get tabooed down the line, I wouldn't be surprised. But when you use the new Ravenous Myconid, it single-handedly fixes your Mythos stats. And you can also run a bunch of other Swiss Army Knife Mythos cards, things like Forewarned, things like Orphic Theory, where sure, you don't necessarily want to run these cards, but a cost of 1 card in a secret deck is not the biggest cost in the world. So the value of a Joe deck tends to come down to how much you can actually capitalize on your stat line and card pool while fixing your Mythos phase. Because if you just ignore your Mythos phase, you consistently end up being much worse than I've currently ranked him, like low C tier. And I think that there are sufficient tools in the card pool to fix his Mythos phase without crippling his tempo at this point. But it's still a thing where it's like your deck building goal in those opening scenarios is fix the Mythos phase. And by the time you're doing really cool stuff, it's like scenario 5 and everyone is broken. And as I said a second ago with Alesandra, I really value being strong in the opening scenarios, and I think that's when Alesandra is by far at her weakest. That's the argument that's really holding down what may be the hottest take in this tier list. Stella Clark is in my C tier. This is not based on the current email ruling. I am shocked to have learned that this exists. There is an email ruling that Quick Learner applies a +2 difficulty penalty to the Mythos phase, which as far as I'm concerned is just a targeted nerf that kills Stella Clark. But pretending that doesn't exist, which is what I will continue to do. Stella Clark proactively is awful in the opening scenarios. Before you get access to Quick Learners and Shadow Lights and Old Keyring 3s, these things that are absolutely insanely strong in Stella Clark, a scenario 5 Stella Clark is clearly an A tier character bare minimum. But before you get that in your opening scenarios, Stella Clark is just floundering. She has 2 book, 3 fist, mono red card pool, and it is brutal to try to get her to perform proactively at an acceptable level. Now, Mythos-wise, she's a fucking tank. She has 3 and 4, 8/8 soak. Being mono red might not be a great card pull proactively, but it basically forces you to run a deck that's even more Mythos resilient than she otherwise would be, with the best Mythos resilient signature in the entire game, 3 copies of it at that. Part of the reason she is this high in C tier is because while proactively she is quite weak in her opening scenarios, other characters that are much stronger proactively are going to be more negatively impacted by the Mythos phase. Not enough to come out behind, Zella's still notably slower than those characters proactively, but enough that the gap is much smaller than it might appear to be. Additionally, the fact that she will steamroll the second half of a campaign fucking matters a lot. If she never scaled up, she'd probably be around like Alesandra to Tommy, somewhere in here. But she scales up to be a genuine monster. And I don't like having her in my C tier. I want her to be better than this. But so many cards that are incredible in her, like Shed a Light and Drawing Then, were cards that really carried her level 0 that she just doesn't get access to at level 0 anymore. And the pile of quote unquote mandatory experience just keeps getting bigger. And it results in a Stella that is incredibly backloaded in power that holds her down a lot. Oh man, the top of C tier hurts me. This is true in the top of every tier, I think. Like with the characters in D, to some degree it doesn't hurt me that badly, but with every tier going forward, I don't like the characters at the top of the tier because I want to rank them higher. I like the characters in the game in general, and the characters coming up in C tier, when I really look at the tier list and think about it, I can't justify putting them higher. So if you're upset by them, know you're definitely not alone, because next up in C tier, we have Preston Fairmont. Preston really is a good investigator. I never look at Preston and think he's weak. At this point, I think he's not even in the bottom 20. If he is, he's right on it. He makes it out of the bottom 20 by the skin of his teeth, number 21. Preston is able to do so much with 4 resources a turn. Is his stat line terrible? Yeah, sure, he doesn't care about that at all. He's just playing a different game than everyone else. And he has this wonderfully unique thing that he alone gets to do, where in the early game when big money is not really there yet, you're better off playing a Dark Horse 0 resources deck where you just pretend to be poor. And then later in the game, when big money and all its experience pieces are available, you can transition to big money in one big jump with 2 copies of Adaptable. And it allows you to like switch from Dark Horse Preston to 2 big money Preston at a midpoint of the campaign to essentially mitigate the weaknesses of both archetypes. Dark Horse doesn't scale well with experience, and big money is very bad without experience. So essentially you get all the support pieces, all the events and all the stuff like that, even double before going into big money. And then in like scenario 4 to 6, depending on what campaign we're talking about, you do a massive jump and change archetype. That's awesome, that's sick as hell. And with both of those archetypes, he's playing the archetype different from anyone else in a very unique and very effective way. My major issue with Preston is that when he's playing Dark Horse in the first half of a campaign, his Mythos resilience is, I'm in danger, aren't I? That's his plan. And yes, you have things like you handle this one. Except when I said things like, I kind of meant specifically you handle this one. It's the only way he's really getting through tests in those first couple of scenarios when he's playing a Dark Horse deck. And that level of Mythos vulnerability is a fucking problem. Not because it might kill Preston, it genuinely might. I've actually never seen a Dark Horse Preston die. No, the much bigger issue is that if you're playing a scenario where failing those tests is negative progress for your team, and there are a lot of scenarios like this, then Preston can make that scenario a fucking nightmare. If Preston in his opening Dark Horse scenarios had a much better Mythos resilience, he'd definitely be getting into my B tier. But for me, I view Preston as a character that is just horribly Mythos vulnerable, and it really holds him down. Sort of similar to Joe Diamond, except with Joe Diamond, I think he's able to overcome it very quickly. With Preston, I feel like I'm playing that Mythos vulnerable character for half the campaign. The flip side is I think Preston is proactively more impressive than Joe pretty much across the board, and more Mythos resilient in the second half of the campaign. And coming up next, I've mentioned that I don't like curse decks, but that doesn't stop me from liking Kohaku quite a lot. Kohaku's able to play Bless, he's able to play Blurse, he's able to play Curse, and personally, I hate Curse to bits. And that really sucks, because Kohaku really feels like he was printed to specifically be good at Flex Curse. That's what I played, and having played it, I will never play that archetype again. However, the thing that makes Kohaku good isn't just that he's able to play those Curse cards, he's able to fit into a Bless team, a Curse team, able to play any Bless or Curse card, And the best thing about Kohaku by far is that aside from the perfectly fine 4-head Mystic game plan you're capable of playing, a little bit worse than a normal 4-head Mystic because you don't get access to your big in-game spells, unfortunately, you're also able to recur things like Spectral Razor effortlessly because you're able to force the token pool with a signature. And your card access just happens to give you access to a massive suite of wonderful support cards. You get Promise of Power, Faustian Bargain, Deep Knowledge, Scroll of Secrets, Key of Solomon. You get some of the best support cards in the game. I don't hear people talk about Kohaku as a powerful support enough because that's why he's high in my C tier instead of low in it. He is an incredibly effective support character. If someone needs economy, Kohaku can give it to them. If they need draw, Kohaku can give it to them. If they need to pass a test, Kohaku can give it to them. If they need to be healed, Kohaku can do that too. He has limited resources on all of this except for Key of Solomon, and I am assuming he's in a blessed team here. But dear God, he has so many support options. He's not great against the Mythos, unfortunately. He kind of wants that Promise of Power and that Ward of Protection for himself because he has 1 in foot. He will be needing those tools to keep himself alive too. And that limits how good he can be as a support a little bit, but he has so many support tools. He's able to play a good enough game plan. He's uniquely good at recurring Spectral Razor, which is just an incredibly powerful thing to be doing. He's very close to B tier in my eyes. And again, I've said it before, I'll say it again. I mean fine. It's not air quotes fine. It's fine. These characters, like towards the top end of C, I genuinely think are good characters. They're just not quite good enough for me to say they're strong. I'll say they're good, comma, but every time with C tier characters. With B tier characters, I don't feel the need to give qualifiers. I might give specifics about how they're good, but there won't be a but. I'm just being thorough in my explanations of it. And moving on to my last character in C tier, God, I wish I could put him higher. It's Leo Anderson. Kohaku's 1 foot hurt, and he had Promise of Power and Ward of Protection. Leo does not have those cards. He does have You Handle This One and Take the Initiative, which is at least a little bit similar, though definitely worse. Leo's 1 foot is a problem that will eat up deck slots guaranteed. However, it's not a problem you can't overcome, and it's worth noting compared to characters like Tommy and Roland. I'm being kind of brisk in my analysis here. 2 foot and 1 foot are the same number. You're failing every time. The difference is that Tommy and Roland take marginally less damage when they're taking a Grasping Hands test. Doesn't really matter. Leo's a meat grinder. He has friends to take the 1 damage for him. I'm not concerned about the 1 foot because of damage from Grasping Hands. I'm concerned about the 1 foot because of ants and every other card that does something bad other than damage on a foot test. And unlike Tommy and Roland, a 4 in head is actually very, very good. I would rather have the 4-1 split to the 3-2 split every single time. As far as main fighting goes, fighters can sometimes be more setup heavy decks, and being able to reaction play your ally assets, also getting a bonus resource when you do it, is very solid. It helps alleviate any setup problems you have. If you're playing a big gun game, then Leo is the best at putting ammo on guns out of everyone with Stick to the Plan Contraband. And if you're playing a bunch of small weapons deck, well, Leo's the best at that too, because he has access to things like Survival Knife and Garrote Wire, or if we're talking small guns, access to things like, not Luger, that's the new one, I can't believe I blanked on like the most iconic rogue gun in the game. The Mauser, that's the one I was thinking of. Whether you're playing big guns or small guns, Leo's the best at it. If you're playing melee weapons, he has great numbers for Cyclopean Hammer. He has access to haste, allowing him to swing a Switchblade or a Cyclopean Hammer more than anyone else. He has a lot of things proactively going for him. Access to Leo DeLuca and haste arguably makes him a better healer than any other Guardian. And damn it, I've convinced myself, get out of seat here, Leo, congratulations. And that's why I've said towards the beginning of this video, it's really hard to rank someone specifically on the tier list. Think of everyone as being plus or minus 2, and every time I talk about the game, every time I learn about the game, every time I play the game, my understanding adjusts and my rankings on the tier list accommodate for that. This is always going to be my own opinion, my current understanding of the game. If it wasn't, I wouldn't be making a new tier list each year. He's got just enough going for him no matter what type of fighter you build that I think he is meaningfully better than someone like a Tommy is. His real downsides amount to limited deck space, experience on the things you want to do all conflicting simultaneously, and 1 in foot. And while those are problems, they're not enough to drop him into C tier. He definitely deserves to be in B tier. I'm being way too mean to this guy. Which brings us to, I guess, our third character in B tier, and that is, I don't know that this is a hot take anymore. I hope it's not. I don't know if the community's come around on this. It's Mandy Thompson. Mandy Thompson with a 30 card deck is a monster. That level of consistency with her ability in a 30 card deck allows her to just say whatever the most broken combo in the game is. Yes, I do that immediately. It happens now. And because 30 card decks are so small, you can easily do things that remove from the game, such as Pendant of the Queen, to artificially lower the size of your deck, to cycle through it faster and faster and repeat the combo with less and less card draw every time. With a 50 card deck, that second part doesn't happen. The first part doesn't either, but the delay of doing the combo the first time is not the problem. Doing the combo in like 8 turns instead of 4 turns is not the issue. It's bad, it's obviously worse, but the fact that the second cycle is going to be another 8 turns instead of like 2 or 3 turns is the major issue. Mandy Thompson with the Taboo in the 50 card deck lost the ability to not only almost immediately trigger any combo in the game, but the ability to repeatedly do that deck cycle after deck cycle over and over and over again. However, that 50 card deck is not going to be a bad deck. There's enough cards in the card pool that you can easily find 50 incredible cards. She has a 10 splash, not 5 like a dumb witch investigator, and they go up to level 1. And if you're looking at literally any of the class colors, I forget which one I think is best because they're all so close, it was probably Survivor. But literally any 10 cards from one of those other classes is an incredible addition to her 40 Seeker cards. Her stat line's incredible. The 3/3 defensively is something that can easily be made to pass any test you care about. She's not bad in any capacity. Anyone who tells you Mandy has become bad, I think, is off their rocker. But I don't think she's anywhere near S tier anymore. And I think if you're looking to do interesting combos, she's worse than almost everyone else. And yeah, her stat line's cracked, but like, welcome to Seekers. Joe Diamond's the exception, not the rule. Most Seekers have messed up stat lines. And her ability to scry more often is not actually something that's that important, because I think a lot of people overstate how often she gets a scry in her opening hand with 50 card decks. There are not that many good scry cards in the game, and with the Mr. Rook nerf, the best scry card is no longer a Lightning Bolt. Like, I'd rather spend 4 experience than have the new Mr. Rook and Mandy. So you end up with a character that might not even hit an opening scry because your deck is so big, and then once you do hit an opening scry, the tempo loss of that scry is real and tangible. She's not bad at all. The stat line is too good, the card pool is too good, she's still strong. I'd rank her higher than Leo and Kaimani, which I think are just genuinely obviously good characters. But I don't think she's breaking the game at all. Which brings us to an incredibly different character in terms of my analysis of power. Let's talk about next up on the list, Charlie Kane. Charlie Kane has so many different decks that he is a character I feel less solid in than most, just because I'm not even going to pretend to have looked at all the possibilities on Charlie. There's simply too many. There are things that stand out to me as the strongest ways to build Charlie. These tend to be Survivor-based cloovers, whether it's Survivor Rogue or Seeker Rogue. Sorry, Seeker Survivor. I don't even know how to succinctly talk about Charlie Kane because there are simply too many different Charlie Kanes. My long story short is that Charlie Kane in Scenario 1 is a bit rough. When you don't have charismas, you don't have that many options to boost your stats in the given turn. Typically, if you use your ability to pass a Mythos test on the opening scenario, you probably have a terrible turn during your Investigator phase. And as you get more charismas and more character slots, more ally slots, you start being able to both pass your Mythos test and do big proactive things in your turn. There are really cool builds of Charlie using Mariner's Compass so that spiking 1 test a turn is really valuable, or 2 once you get the second one. There are really cool builds of Charlie that are using the Summoned Hound combo to put him into play for extra actions at higher base values without getting the weakness shuffled into your deck. And regardless of what kind of Charlie you play, you'll tend to see Charlie best off with really high draw decks because you are playing a different character when Bonnie Walsh is in your deck, in play. So playing high draw to help tutor her out, whether it's just massive draw with Seeker Survivor or playing a rogue deck using Hit and Run and calling in favors. Whatever method you go for, the best Charlie decks tend to be the decks that are finding Bonnie immediately in addition to the rest of their game plan. The lack of opening charismas, the missing combo pieces in Scenario 1, that holds him down a lot. Once you have like a Scenario 3 Charlie, like very high in A tier, he's fucked up, he's not okay. However, with minimal experience, his opening scenarios are actually pretty damn rough, like way worse than these guys in Scenario 1. I'm not gonna say it's close. But very shortly after that, he comes online in a kind of monstrous way. Silas is a character that's hard for me to evaluate because I've seen disgusting top ends and I've seen comically bad bottom ends. I have seen Silas just get destroyed in Scenario 1 of Return to Carcosa, where he draws the Countess, or rather kills her, and it goes into his hand. And he literally can't do anything because he has a 3-card hand as a skill-based character. And I have seen him just fumble to the point that we re-mulligan the session, tried again, failed a second time, and then the person piloting Silas is like, I'm just gonna play a different character, this shit isn't working. And I've also seen Silas just like scenario 3 destroying scenarios, doing everything he needs to, both as a main fighter and as a Dark Horse flex. The variance in Silas performances I have seen is kind of wild. So it makes it hard for me to analyze the character properly, because I don't think there's another character like this that I've just seen all over the map in terms of how they performed. As far as Dark Horse flexes goes, Silas is one of the better ones, but I don't think it's better than his abilities as a main fighter. Just playing a high draw, high consistency deck, trying your best to find the harpoon so that A, you just have a reliable good weapon, and B, you're able to do disgusting things and easily one action kill 3 and 4 health enemies. The downside of a fighter Silas like that though is if you're playing a net based deck, you really have to play backpacks. You have to find that net. And with only 2 in head and not the best ways of fixing your head, you do find yourself somewhat afraid of your 5 horror, so you have to plan around that. But again, whether it's backpack, which are sweepstakes, or Pete Sylvester, I personally lean towards Pete because I love the mythos stats. Either way, you do have solutions available to Silas's problems, and you end up with a very strong character. I'm tempted to rank him lower because the most recent performance I've seen was the person just giving up on playing him as our fighter in Return to Carcosa. And then at the same time, I'm also tempted to rank him higher than this because I've seen him perform at levels better than this. And I'm just not in a sound state of mind when it comes to Silas. I've told my team, I don't care what we play next, I'm playing fighter Silas. So hopefully next time I do a tier list, I'll have a more hard opinion on Silas, but for now, I think he deals with his problems well enough and is strong enough proactively that I would rather have him on my team than the raw consistency of like Kaimani or the, honestly, same thing with Mandy. They're consistent for very different reasons. Kaimani just starts with and tutors the method of doing their jobs, whereas Mandy is just good enough stats that it doesn't matter what cards of her huge deck she draws. I think Silas is playing a much more interesting version of a character that is consistently doing their job. But boy howdy, is the character up next ever doing the least interesting version of a good job. Next up in B tier, we have Daniela Reyes. Daniela just hits dudes, and then sometimes, if that wasn't enough, she gets hit back, and then they die after that. I cannot overstate how strong her ability is. The fact that you can just like walk to a cultist as your final action, they hit you and die for free, like 1 damage means nothing to a Daniela. That's absolutely the best case scenario, but there are so many scenarios where Daniela's ability just warps the game and becomes monstrously effective. What's that? There's a massive enemy? Don't worry, gang, you can all end your turn here. It's not gonna do anything to you. It'll hit me first and then it'll get tripped. Daniela has a very, very powerful ability and an absolutely sick stat line. The 2 in foot is obviously a little bit unfortunate, but with more health soak and having access to survivor tools to make her more resilient in general, it's just not a big deal. And as I look at Daniela, middle of my B tier, almost dead middle of the tier list, the next character would be my 30th investigator on the tier list, and therefore the middle of the pack exactly. I caught myself doing something that I do all the time. I was like, man, am I being too mean to Daniela? She's really good. Should she be higher than this? And she is really good. B tier is really good. But the characters above her are really, really rock solid. I don't think she's better than them, except for one. I'm gonna go ahead and move Skids, parallel Skids that is, down 1 rank beneath Daniela compared to where I originally had him when I was coming to do this video. I love parallel Skids to bits. If you think he's overranked, boy howdy, you might be right. But if you tell me I can have a 17 card deck, I suddenly don't care what draw I have because I'm just going to draw all my cards. Parallel Skids allows you to run a 25 card deck, Underworld Support allows you to bring it down to a 20 card deck, and once you get Bewitching later in the campaign, it goes down to 17. It's just a stupid amount of consistency. Combine that with the fact that his ability allows you to get more resources than a Ginny and simultaneously convert every foot or question mark skill into a lightning bolt event essentially. He plays different from anyone else. He plays in a very unique and powerful way. He's probably one of the best characters at capitalizing on big money, even though he's not the best character that is going to use big money well. However, scenario 1 Skids, his stat line's a little, terrible, and a lot of the things you buy with experience to fix it aren't in your deck yet. So that's a problem. He is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 spots above Stella, and I think that might be about right. He comes on with a lot less experience than Estella does, and I think reaches much higher peaks than Estella as well. But he's in a very similar vein to Stella, a character that is held down by their opening scenarios, by the things they have to spend experience on. but the peaks of big money parallel skids are just incredibly impressive. He's wholly unique to everyone else, and I'm sort of blinded by the fact that he's sick as hell. However, I've also dropped him like almost an entire tier over the course of my discussion videos, so I think I'm probably being pretty fair to him at this point. I think I was probably being too kind originally, and I was definitely being too kind putting him above Daniela. That was crazy talk. But as we move on into the B tier, we're getting to the top half of characters now, the top 29, we've done the bottom 30. The remaining characters are just a brick wall of quality. It sort of started with Leo Anderson, and about every 5 characters from here on forward, it's starting to look like we're playing a different game, where the rules are progressively more unfair, and arguments about who's better will gradually go from like where we are now, like there's a tangible difference in a Leo Anderson and a Daniela as your main fighter. I think you can feel the difference. And as we get high in A tier, it's starting to feel sort of academic, like we're discussing theoretical physics, and none of this actually applies to the reality of Arkham. Once we're into S tier, character placement's academic. It's going to be a thing where like, we're discussing who would hypothetically have beaten the game harder if there were a game left to beat. And it's right here after Daniela that starts to happen for me, where each character is progressively more broken than the last one until we're doing deranged things at the top of S tier. Which brings me to my next character in B tier, Akachi. Akachi is just rock solid. Her stat line is gross, 5 head, 3 foot, and a mystic is just the best stat line in the game. There is no better stat line for a class than that. However, if you wanted to continue talking, a 2 in book and a 3 in fist is pretty close to the optimal way you could spread your stats outside of that. We're never gonna see a 5 head, 4 foot mystic, but we might see like a 5 head, 1 book, 4 fist, 3 foot mystic, and that would be marginally better than this. That 3 fist is enough to use Dragon Pole. If you were to upgrade it to a Cyclopean Hammer, which I don't even recommend in Akachi, it would be better for a Cyclopean Hammer as well. But the big thing is 3 is enough to use Dragon Pole as a main weapon. Akachi really wants an additional arcane slot to make use of some interesting synergies with her ability. Dragon Pole Flex Akachi is just an absolute house. It is rock solid at every point in the game, extremely mythos resilient. You're a mystic with 5 and 3 in the stats. What's the game gonna do to you? She's just incredibly good, and the Dragon Pole Flex deck she plays is an incredibly versatile, self-sufficient flex. If somebody told me they had Akachi in A tier, I would not blink. I'd be like, yeah, makes sense. I might revisit that thought in a little while. Let's put a pin in that. Going on to our next character, it's Finn Edwards. And Finn is not a house. I would not describe Finn as the complete package. Finn has holes, notably a 1 in head. Perhaps the bigger hole for Finn is that while Finn is very tempted to play a flex game or even a fighter game, I'm not gonna get into it too much right now, you really cannot kill very well at all in scenario 1. And it makes your opening scenarios for Finn very awkward. And like I mentioned at the beginning of this tier list, there are ways you can play like Kluber Finn that transitions to Fighter Finn alongside a Fighter Mark that transitions to Flex Mark. And that team is sick as hell. It's for me like the holy grail of team building is to find stuff like that meaningfully elevates Finn from all his weaknesses in B tier getting covered for very high into the A tier. However, looking at Finn in a vacuum, assuming that you kind of have to play the same role for the whole game, which is not like a thing that's wild to assume, you're probably looking at Flex Finn being the best version of Finn. And in scenario 1, you're not really supplying a ton of damage if you're playing a Flex Finn, which can be a problem. There's rarely gonna be scenarios with like a lot of elite enemies that you have to kill in scenario 1, so it's not the biggest problem, but it's notable. Additionally, 1 head at a point in time where you really don't have great solutions to head in scenario 1, you know, it sucks. 1 head is something you can solve. It's something rogues are very familiar with solving, but it's still not good. The thing that brings Finn this high in the tier list really is how incredibly strong he is as a flex once you have Underworld Market with the right cards inside of it, namely Dirty Fighting and Knuckle Dusters. Because once you're using Dirty Fighting, you can free action evade a guy, then reaction hit with Knuckle Dusters. And that is a base value of 5 with nothing else in play. You want stuff like Lonnie Ritter for infinite soak combos getting you to 6. That's just good enough by far for a flex character. You combine that with picking up the big money package later on because you want to boost your foot and your book as well, right? You want to investigate with your book, you want to have higher foot numbers for dodging, and you end up being insanely powerful in the second half of the campaign. And even with just your core experience, you start being very, very effective in scenarios 2 and 3. But that first scenario, and in a low experience campaign, even the second scenario can be pretty awkward for a Finn. That's the main thing holding him down. And with every character, we're gonna play the game how much are you underrating Akachi? I'm at least underrating her that much. I'm moving her above Finn. Continuing on in the upper ranks in my B tier, we have Diana Stanley. I don't think it's right to say that Diana has tremendously better canceling effects than other mystics because generally speaking, you are using your first cancels very frivolously. And while you're canceling something is better than not canceling it, if you ever use warded protection on obscuring fog at a location with no clues just because you need a point in head, that is actually not better than canceling nothing. And in the opening turns, it's so important for Diana to get her head rolling and be usable as an investigator proactively that you are very willing to cancel almost nothing just to get the +1 head, draw a card, gain a resource. And that's before we even get into the fact that in a lot of games, you simply win before you ever draw your dagger. You don't actually recur anything. So I don't think it's right to say that Diana gets a ton of value out of canceling compared to other investigators. Although she is better at it, I would not say it's like anywhere close to double. I wouldn't even say it's 50% more than another character that just cared about it, right? Like you can just build an Agnes that runs additional copies of warded protection, and it would be very similar to a Diana. What she does do though is scale up to be a 5-head mystic with 3 in foot, and she has an ability that generates cards and resources, which is value. Previously, I might have ranked her even lower than this because I viewed the setup time as a problem. I thought having to set up like this really meaningfully held the character down. However, with the addition of Hemlock Vale and all of level 2, I think Diana has a very cool build open to her where she's using all of McBride and Sixth Sense, and this is a way to have a more setup heavy deck than your average Mystic, and because you're spending more time setting up, the fact your head is lower doesn't really matter. Olive and Sixth Sense is not what I view as generally the best way to build a Mystic, but it's not much worse than just using Rite of Seeking. And normally a setup strategy gets worse when paired with another setup strategy because suddenly you've set up so long that the game is over. It's why if you use assets to fight and assets to find clues, you end up with a character that's actually a pretty bad flex because you have too many play actions. But Diana Stanley's setup is not related to play actions. It's just an amount of time needs to pass to cancel until you have at least 4 head. It's on a different axis of setup essentially. And so playing a more setup heavy Mystic deck that now exists and is pretty damn good sort of bypasses her bad setup time. I think she's very strong. All the characters at the top of my B tier, I mean, obviously, right? The characters at the top of B are close to A, the characters at the bottom of B are close to C. I think Diana's very good. I think she's pushing the limits of what B tier can be, but we're not done in B tier. We actually have a couple more characters to go, and I think this is the end of the Akachi minigame. I genuinely do not think she's better than Diana. And it's what I was talking about earlier with Daniela and Skids, where it's like, yeah, the characters just get progressively better and more terrifying as we push through these last 2 tiers. Although I do wonder if I'm being too nice to Min-T fan. Min's just able to play a rock solid tempo game. If you're playing a team that needs a support men will be better than tempo men. But in a vacuum, she's just great at using Mariner's Compass. There's enough things that compress clues a little bit in Survivor that when paired with all the secret clue compression, you can just make a men deck that's going to almost every clue action she takes test for multiple clues, and it's very, very high paced. And I'll mention it because it always comes up, I don't like scavenging in men. Scenarios 1 and 2 matter to me a ton, and when you buy scavenging, you're spending a lot of experience to do a big clunky combo, and I feel like I can just make a deck that's better right now, and that once I have scavenging combos set up, like, cool, it's slightly better, but it costs a lot more experience and I don't really see the appeal. And I think the argument that I'm overranking men really does directly come down to 2 in foot. However, your men, all your icons commit for 1 more question mark. If you can just have cards ready to commit to foot, then huzzah, you're done. And those cards exist. Survey the area exists if that's how you want to deal with it. There are other methods of solving your bad foot as well. It's not the only skill in the game. Like I look at men and I think, oh, is that 2 foot a problem? And maybe because I'm an asshole, my decks view it as a problem, but I feel like it's one that can easily be solved if you're playing a campaign where you feel the need to solve it. But even as I say that, I can't put her. I thought the Akachi minigame was done. You can go hang out with Finn. And moving on to the next character, it's going to be Ursula Downs. Ursula's a character that gets ragged on relentlessly by the community. And I mean, somebody has to stand up for her. Ursula's just good. Her ability gives you free investigate actions. Investigating is how you win the game. Clues are good. It's not Rex's ability, but her stat line is better than Rex's, and Rex doesn't get Karen's Obel for a free 2 experience every scenario. Admittedly, her card pool is awful. It's basically Karen's Obel and 20 other cards that are gonna make you look at them and go, huh, that's not helpful. Because the vast majority of cards that are relics are in Seeker, and the ones that aren't tend to just be kind of binder filler unexceptional garbage. However, 4 book with an ability that gives you free investigates and a total of 7 in your Mythos stats is really strong. See, your card pool is cracked. It's just not hard to build a character with Ursula where you are incredibly good at triggering your ability, investigating an extra time every turn, and passing every test with ease. Even if you're stuck in one location, in the opening scenarios, that might be a slight problem at higher player counts, but at higher player counts, you can trust people to help you. You're not alone in higher player counts. And then, even if there's only one location on the map, after scenario like 2, it's very early, you get enough experience to do this, you have Eon charts and Pathfinders. You Pathfinder out and Eon chart back in. I see Ursula just frenetically bouncing around back to the same location at the end of every scenario she's in, and it's just generating investigates. There's no lost tempo, there's no problem. So I find a lot of the downsides of Ursula, boring deck building, the fact that she scales worse with player counts, get overstated. And I've actually only seen Ursula in 3-player games and it never felt like, oh man, poor Ursula, there's too many clues here for her to play her game plan smoothly. It's just been like, oh, I guess I'll pick up that clue for Ursula and she can move on. I don't have much more to say about Ursula, she's just obviously good. I will mention, Ursula is probably even better than I'm giving her credit for because of her archaic glyphs build that is genuinely disgusting. And if your arguments against her being strong have anything to do with player count, then the archaic glyphs build that I am talking about right now is probably better at higher player counts because there are more clues to get in the first place. And moving on to the next character, it's Ursula's twin brother, Monterey Jack. If you watched these discussion videos as they came out, you will have seen Ursula and Monty like moving back and forth within 5 spots of each other constantly. They started side by side at a different point in the tier list, moved up, moved down, each independently, and eventually always wound up settling back next to each other, which is very funny to me. Monterey Jack is worse at being Ursula, which is to say he's worse at getting clues. He's also worse if there's only one location left on the board. What he's better at is, holy shit, is the whip broken. The whip is not okay. The whip is so far from okay, it is a 1-card flex. The whip with nothing else in play attacks at base 7, essentially unlimited ammo, and once per turn when you hit with it, it deals 2 damage and evades the guy. So he's terrible at killing a Night God, but anything with 2 health, he is one of the best flex investigators in the game for killing it, and the fact it is a 2-cost fast card is ridiculous. You just build Backpack Monty with a lot of troll and you find the whip. And then if you get any amount of clues with the rest of your deck, you're one of the best flexes in the game because you're essentially just playing Monty as full Kluber with reliably finding the whip as your game plan to flex. The major weakness of Monty is his 1 head, but thanks to In the Thick of It, his ability giving him resources, the fact he has access to unlimited level 0 green cards, and higher education being untabooed back to 3 experience, just use In the Thick of It, start with higher education, and you actually are not Mythos frail at all. No, in fact, you're better than Ursula. You're better than most characters. You will pass every Mythos test you care about. Monty is rock solid, very close to A tier. And I do mean that because he is my character at the very, very top of B tier. Moving into A tier, a character that has really fallen from grace in my review videos. I wasn't expecting it, I'm not happy about it, it's Wendy Adams. Wendy Adams is a character that, if there is a faster setup time of Wendy Adams, and I've been told there is, but I just do not understand and see it, then Wendy Adams can move up a lot in the tier list. Her stat line's terrible, her stat line doesn't matter. She plays Foot Matters Rogue better than most rogues do, because 4 in head, 4 in foot is just great Mythos resilience that most rogues have to use card slots dealing with. Her ability means she's not worried about auto-failing a Pilfer, she's not worried about auto-failing a Grasping Hand, she's just incredibly reliable. The fact that I have a good 20 some odd characters above this is kind of fucking wild. However, what my experience has been consistently is that as good as Wendy is, and make no mistake, she is incredible, she has a good chunk of setup time. She has a good chunk of experience cards that make her deck meaningfully better. Scenarios 1 and 2, not the most impressive character in the world. And then the setup time tends to mean that sure, she's super reliable, but proactively, she's not like blowing me away. There are characters in B tier, like everyone above Finn, that I think proactively give Wendy a run for her money, maybe outperform her in a lot of situations. And I think that's all I had to say about Wendy, because I think there's almost nobody that needs me to explain why Wendy is high. I think they need to explain why she's not higher than this. So moving on to our next character, it is Trish. I really like Trish as a character. She's a blast to play, but in terms of raw power level, a lot of the characters above Trish that are playing clue-based games get more clues than Trish. A lot of the characters above Trish that are talking about Mythos resilience are more mythos resilient with less work than big money is for Trish. She's not weak in any capacity. Rogue 5 Seeker 2 is a crazy fucking card pool. She has pretty much the best possible stats other than having like a point and fist go to head that she could. Like if she would be better with Ursula's stat line, it's a perfectly optimized stat line, but her stat line's still very solid being a rogue, especially when you build into big money, and none of this is gonna be a problem. She has access to some very powerful high tempo decks, and she has access to some very, very mythos immune decks that are rock solid and sort of like Kaimani here in lower tiers will just always do what you need the character to do without real fear of mythos interruption. And for that reason, I think she easily gets into A tier. But like very shortly, we're gonna start talking about a list of characters where they're doing broken things that don't feel okay, things that make me feel kind of gross. And Trish, for all her strength, feels like she's playing a fair game to me. So does Carson. No one's to say Carson feels unfair. But Carson is kind of a monstrous support character. For a long time, I had Carson lower than this in my tier list, the argument being the better your teammates are, the better Carson is. So like, the worse your teammates are, the worse Carson is. That is actually a very easy logical fallacy to fall into. Because a lot of the characters we haven't talked about yet, yeah, they might be a bit proactively stronger than the people in B tier, but typically speaking, a lot of characters above Carson in A tier and in the top of the S tier are there in part or entirely because of their mythos resilience. Proactively, the value of the Seekers we haven't talked about yet versus men is actually pretty similar if you just give them an additional action on their turn. What Carson does that's wild is when he's supporting quote unquote weaker teammates, characters lower on the tier list. As an example, we could say a Roland Banks, a Jenny Barnes, a Joe Diamond. These characters that are much lower on the tier list that get less out of his proactive actions get more out of his other forms of support. When he gives you skills during the Mythos phase, when he takes the damage for you with Obsidian Mirror and Tetsuo. These are things that are not valuable at all to Harvey Walters. Harvey Walters is like, why are you trying to soak for me? I'm fine, go away. Like in a recent campaign of Dream Eaters, one of my teammates played Gloria, my fighter was not Cho, and I was Harvey. No one could do a foot test. I took every foot test on Harvey and I passed all of them because I was rapid cycling survey the area. That's part of why he's not gonna be talked about for a hot second. And it's a huge part of why many other characters rank much lower than him is that if they were on that team, we simply couldn't have taken a foot test. Carson lets anyone take a foot test. He also lets anyone fail a foot test with impunity. There's a very real argument I'm still underrating Carson, but I think that it's definitely true that Carson is not just better with better teammates. There's an argument to be made that with like the mid-tier teammates is when he's at his absolute best. When someone proactively is almost as good as an S tier character, but they have holes that someone else needs to fix for them, that's when Carson's at its best. It's not with the S tier teammates. And for that reason, Carson gets into the A tier. And maybe, just maybe, he should have gotten higher than this, but I don't really believe that just yet. Next up in the list, we have Norman Withers. Norman is disgusting, proactively speaking. You can play a flex game with Norman where you're using astronomical Atlas to loop deduction on every investigate check at base 5, and you're using upgraded Shribblings at base 7, and you're just an absolute menace. You are so self-sufficient and so powerful. And sure, you need to be babied for a couple of turns before you find your Shribbling, but once you have it, it's all gas, no brakes, right? Norman plays in just an insanely strong flex game. Sure, he's got a 1 in book. Use Promise of Power about it, use Ward of Protection about it. Dude doesn't have weaknesses, he's all strengths, no problems. Now, he also does sort of cap out at what I just said. He's never doing a lot more than using Shribblings to kill guys. He's never doing a lot more than looping deductions. And like that's incredible, it is. But the wards and the Promise of Powers really aren't team support. You really do need them for yourself, and if you give them to someone else, then you're probably gonna be taking the same thing back later on down the line or getting punished for it. He's incredibly good. I have nothing bad to say about Norman, only that there are characters that are even stronger than he is. For instance, I finally talked him up the tier list. It took a while to get here, Nathaniel Cho. Now, for a long time, my argument against Nathaniel Cho was that all he does is kill the shit out of guys. And don't get me wrong, you gotta do that at some point. You do need to kill all the guys. But his Mythos Resilience isn't very good, and that's a bit of a big problem. And yeah, I agree with that. His Mythos Resilience is his Achilles heel. If he had Mythos Immunity, he'd be an S tier. The thing Nat Cho does that makes me think he's easily better than, not easily better than Norman, but easily better than like a parallel Zoe, is Nat Cho is so incredibly good at fighting. 4-fist characters like Tommy down here in the tier list, he's hiding under Nacho right now. 4-fist guardians really have to build in a way that acknowledges they have 4-fist and boosts their fist more aggressively than a 5-fist guardian does. Nacho is so incredibly good at fighting that he doesn't have to upgrade his fighting first. And sure, you can never get great clue finding or great support cards for Nacho, except for one. You can go immediately into Stick to the Plan Ever Vigilant 4 with your first 10 experience on Nathaniel Cho. And it is disgusting. Because Nathaniel Cho just giving his teammates 4 actions and 4 resources guaranteed turn 1, and then making you just completely certain that you will never have a problem with enemies for the rest of the scenario is fucking wild. A huge part of Carson being this high on the tier list is that when you play with Carson, turn 1 he plays Ever Vigilant 4, turn 2 Mythos Phase, he uses Stick to the Plan again and plays First Watch. Nacho can just steal that combo. He's good enough at fighting that he doesn't need to spend his experience on fighting immediately. And I've gotten to see that in action. It's sick as hell. Also, if you are playing Nacho with Ever Vigilant 4, it guarantees your star can hit Ever Vigilant 4. And yeah, I got to see that too. I got to see a second Ever Vigilant 4 go off on turn 2. It was the grossest thing I've ever fucking witnessed in Arkham. I've witnessed some terrible things. I've witnessed Deny 5 on Diana Esperance, allowing someone to fucking solo 3-player Dagon. And I would put the second Ever Vigilant 4 in the first 2 turns up there with that. So I think that amount of team support that running Ever Vigilant 4 in that show, while simultaneously being able to pretty much 3-man fight, is wild. Sure, his Mythos resistance isn't great. You've done enough. Ask someone to help you with that. It's not quite enough for me to bring him to my S tier or much higher than this. The Mythos resilience is a problem. It is an Achilles heel. And that is a rare thing to see on somebody that I put in my A tier. Proactively, Nacho is so incredibly strong when you take the support build that I cannot put him lower than this. And once again, we're moving on to progressively more deranged things. On my next character, it is going to be Kate Winthrop. And maybe I'm actually higher on Kate than most people. Allow me to explain why. Kate has the ability to play Clue Dropper better than almost anyone else. Because Kate can drop the clues that she places on her assets, anytime she uses her ability, she can drop the clue onto her asset and then drop it with Quick Study for +5 to any test. Which, you know, +20 to your stat line's a lot. You're not worried about the Mythos phase, because again, Clue Dropper also runs Maelstrom. You can just get rid of a card every Mythos phase. You want to, it's actually net action positive pretty much as soon as you have a couple of assets in play to do that. She's just disgusting with Clue Dropper. Maelson's such wonderful team support, being able to pass any Mythos test for Mythos immunity, being able to do any scenario test that your team needs. She is just incredibly good with clue dropping as an archetype. Beyond that, I mean, that's most of the deck. You're just playing a Seeker that gets clues. But I mean, you're using William T. Maelstrom to just mitigate the worst card every Mythos phase. And then on top of that, you can pass any test, you're Mythos immune. You've got good enough book to just like, you know, get a lot of clues. You're a Clue Dropper, you have tempo things going on, just not as many. It is an inherently more support build. But like, holy shit, is it good. It's incredibly good. The main reason Kate doesn't rank higher is because Clue Dropper is kind of a big pile of experience, right? It is a setup heavy archetype where before scenario 3, you probably don't have all the pieces. I would say definitely, unless you're playing like Dream Eaters. And then even in scenario 3, there are a lot of play actions that have to happen before then. However, she's still just incredibly good. Clue dropping is a good archetype. Being setup heavy, being slow, requiring experience, all of these are bad things. I really care about scenario 1 and 2. So despite the fact that like talking about a setup scenario for Kate Winthrop, I would put her in my S tier. When you take into account the whole campaign, scenarios 1 and 2 really hold this lady down. I gotta keep her in the middle of my A tier. Which brings me to my next character on the list, a character that I played most recently and loved to bits, Dexter Drake. In previous expansions, I said that Dexter, using cute cards that were really good with his ability, kind of was a net negative to him. And I'll stand by the statement that the best use of Dexter's ability is to replace an empty Rite of Seeking with a full Clairvoyance. That's just obviously the best thing you can use it for. However, there are enough great, easy, expendable cards to use now that Dexter's ability is like, you don't need to think about Switchblade level 0 anymore. You don't need to think about Liquid Courage. They're just clearly great things. You have Scroll of Secrets, you have David Renfield, you have Arcane Initiate, and you have Cat Mask. You can easily put 8 great targets for his ability into a deck now, and combine that with how insanely strong a Flex Dexter is, Because the best part of fighting Dexter is obviously Cyclopean Hammer, and the best part of clue finding Dexter is Rite of Seeking. And rather than filling out with progressively worse cards, you just say, no, I'm not gonna bother with that. I'm gonna run the most roll I can. I'm gonna run the best parts of both archetypes. And then I'm just either going to destroy guys with Cyclopean Hammer and Leo DeLuca, or I'm going to find 3 clues in action with Rite of Seeking. And it's so strong. In our Dream Eaters campaign, we played triple flex on the team with Dexter, and just consistently, Dexter was basically the main fighter of that team as a full flex deck that also far more than carried its weight in clues. Dexter is an absolute menace when you build into flex, and I just have no complaints. The additional resources and actions you get out of his ability with all of these cheap garbage assets are really meaningful. The value you have on Dragon Pole early or Cyclopean Hammer late is great, and then you're just, 5-head Seeker with Rite of Seeking. Your foot sucks, yeah, but you have Ward of Protection and Promise of Power, so who cares? The things holding Dexter down really are just that, he doesn't have any team support, his proactive value being incredible, yes, but not something I view as particularly overpowered. Dexter is absolutely fantastic, but not so broken I'm putting him in my S tier. And above him, we're starting the Mystic Power Hour. Of all the things on my tier list, I look at this and I don't like it. We have a lot of mystics to talk about. Next up, we have Lily Chen. Thankfully, this one's not really a mystic. You can argue it's not going to be a bunch of consecutive mystics, as Lily is most definitely a guardian in a trench coat. Let's cover Lily in Scenario 1, because it's easy to think that if Scenario 1's so important to me, then how is Lily getting there? Because a lot of people didn't like Lily in Scenario 1 when she first came out, and she's gotten a lot of support since then. Additionally, getting your head boosted in Scenario 1's a complete trap. You always take Fist going first. What can Lily do for weapons in Scenario 1? Dragon Pole with a pile of arcane assets is where you start, because you can run things like Scrying and Talisman of Protection that are just generally useful to fill the slots for cheap. You don't actually care about using them to fight. You can also take In the Thick of It for 2 copies of Branding Kathuga level 1, which will attack at base 5 with your Fist, which will help you to get that Dragon Pole enabled. We haven't covered Guardian Splash yet. You can take, with your last In the Thick of It, 1 pip on Runic Axe, which makes them both count as level 1 weapons, and not as Splash. You can take 2 copies of Machete and 2 copies of Enchanted Blade. We're at 10 weapons right now, and we've only used 2 splash slots on machetes. You can argue that's too many weapons and cut the machetes. Lily Chen is a 5-fist fighter with access to far more than enough weapons at level 1 to steamroll everything with 3/3 in her Mythos stats. She only gets better from there. Over the course of the campaign, her head and foot will increase to base 4. The foot discipline gives her access to one of the best methods of burst fighting in the game, allowing you to use Sweeping Kick into Branding Kathuga, into Runic Axe, or whatever weapon you're building around. She has an incredibly Mythos resilient deck because you're getting access to all your level 0 purple stuff with Words of Protection and Promise of Power. And that's before I even mentioned the most disgusting thing about Lily, is that it turns out all of McBride is fucking broken with Runic Axe. Because if you have +5 to your attack because you spent 2 charges, then when you use all of it to reveal 3 tokens, you're gonna be fine. You're at 10 base with no other assets in play. So yeah, Olive McBride gives her an unreasonable level of consistency. Combine that with just her Mythos resilience, her consistency, her number of fighting cards, I'm incredibly close to putting Lily Chen in my S tier. And there are a couple of characters that I've slipped in front of her over the course of time that are all gonna be moving down, because Lily Chen being as far from S tier as she was in my notes is wrong. It's just no one wants to come to Lily's defense and tell me I'm underranking her because she's boring as sin. Because yeah, she do just hit people with weapon. But I mean, every Guardian hit people with weapon, that's what they do. You know, I said that, and I looked at the characters above Lily, and I'm not entirely convinced that's true. Let's grab Parallel Agnes Baker. Because, yeah, she's pretty good too. Pretty good, but not better than Lily Chen. I'm gonna move her down. I will note that I'm talking about half Parallel Agnes using the Parallel Front and the Vanilla back, getting you access to red cards, notably at a Crossroads for better draw and consistency, Sparrow Mass to boost your Mythos stats to 7/5 and recharge it all the time with her ability, and Bandages, because you know, you're a Blood Wizard, tapping your health all the time, obviously good here. Parallel Agnes just plays a disgustingly effective flex game, using cards like Drain Essence and Spectral Razor unlimited because they're shuffling back into your deck, and those cards are just like Drain Essence and Parallel Agnes just makes the character play so smooth. It gives you so much additional health, it makes you so much more threatening than previous versions of Parallel Agnes were. Combine that with the ability to just, you know, draw through your deck pretty quickly, build a high draw deck, use backpacks to find core cards, and you'll eventually get to stuff like Rite of Seeking to just, you know, do the traditional Mystic game plan of bulldozing through locations 3 clues at a time. She's very, very good. 7-5 mythos stats basically forever is a big part of that. Not gonna pretend otherwise, but she's just transparently, obviously powerful. Although I wonder how much the mythos stats are tempting me to rank her higher, because I could see her being like all the way down here, even down here. She's very good. She's very weird too, and that makes me not quite sure where she should fall. One of the very notable things for Parallel Agnes is because you're constantly shuffling spells back into your deck, Arcane Initiate really does just become draw one card return fairly quickly. I don't think I rank her higher than Dexter, to be honest. And looking at it even further, I don't think I rank her higher than Nat or Kate either. Norman, I'll give, but I think it's such a weird character. Everything is apples to oranges, but in this analogy, Agnes is mushrooms. I'm gonna go ahead and put her between Nacho and Norman Withers. I don't feel comfortable putting her above Lily Chan at the very top of my A tier when such insane characters are right here. For an infinitely more boring Mystic game plan, let's talk about Jacqueline Fine, who definitely deserves to be at least high in my A tier. Jacqueline Fine is rock solid. I don't really have anything to say about Jacqueline. She's a Mystic with 5 head, 2 in foot, which is obviously not good, but you can use Ward and Promise of Power if you've been over this. 5 head's a good place to live. Her ability is insane, allowing you to effectively just pass a test per turn, or for your teammate to do it. Once you draw Arbiter Fates, which is enough incentive to run as much draw as you can cram into her pure purple deck, then having that Arbiter Fates is going to allow you to just give out your ability like candy. Every test that matters, every turn, give that to. Because, you know, there's not gonna be that many more than 2 ever in one turn. And yeah, she's just insane team support, insane reliability, very, very strong. I don't think she's overpowered. I don't think she deserves to be an S tier. She's rock solid. I'm not putting her below Lily, but I don't quite think she hits S for me. And there's one more Mystic at the top of my A tier that breaks my fucking heart. I once said, I don't know if this was on video or privately to my friends, it'll be a cold day in hell when I don't put Luke Robinson in my S tier. So I suppose it's snowing in the 7th circle because Luke is at the top of my A tier. I love Luke to bits. Mystics are so often defined by their weaknesses. Their relatively weak card draw, their relatively weak economy, and their lack of mobility. Almost complete lack of mobility. Luke's access to Seeker cards fixes all of that. But more than that, his starting gate box makes him the most mobile character in the game, allows him to do things that are entirely unique to Luke, to the point that having your games broken by Luke is a rite of passage for custom content creators. It's ridiculous how fun Luke is. Luke isn't broken in an oppressive way. The way that Luke is incredibly strong is possibly the best way for a character to be too strong. Luke is so fun and so intuitive and so satisfying. But he's a 4-head Mystic that has to overcome his 4-head. He has 5 in Meat Soak, which is a real tangible weakness. And proactively, he's just the guy. Like, yeah, he's a broken guy with a lot of good stuff going on where he spends less movement actions than he should. He's incredibly close to being in my S tier, just like Jacqueline and Lily. These characters at the top of A are all genuinely incredible and flawless. It's just that it turns out you can be better than flawless. Like, sure, Luke's great. I have nothing bad to say about Luke, but is Luke, look at Winifred. Winifred's passing every Mythos test by committing Savant and another card to draw a card. And then during her turn, she's taking at least 3 actions that all draw at least 1 card. She's passing all of those actions easily. There are so many turns in a Winifred game where you start your turn, you trip a guy, pickpocketing triggers, 1 lucky cigarette case triggers, you draw 2 cards off manual dex level 2, you draw another card off your ability, that's 6 cards already. And then over the course of your turn, using Thief Kits and Bulldogs and playing Sleight of Hand so that you have unlimited resources on all of them, you're gonna play an ace in the hole, you're going to have 6 actions, 5 more after that first draw 6. Like, Winifred's fucking crazy. Getting into S tier is genuinely problematic for the game. If I put someone in S, I'm saying that I think they are so strong it's unhealthy. And that's how I feel about Winifred, but it's not how I feel about Lily, Jacqueline, or Luke. I think if there were targeted nerfs to any of the characters in A tier, I would be kind of confused by it, except for Wendy because she has a million infinites and those are bad for the game. But for any reason other than infinite combos, I don't think A tier characters are deserving of a targeted nerf on the taboo list. That's not true for S tier characters. Maybe I think you shouldn't nerf them, maybe I would disagree with a specific nerf, but I would not be surprised or upset if a nerf came out on the taboo list clearly intended to weaken an S tier character, because I view them all as problematically powerful. When I say overpowered, I mean it. And having covered Winifred a second time, that brings us deeper into the S tier. Let's talk about William Yorick, the Teslas tank. This guy does not die. Just period, end of story. Will Yorick's not dying. William Yorick infinitely recurs things for free because of his ability. Thanks to short supply, he starts off with 10 cards in his graveyard, also known as his hand. He has access to Guardian Fight cards 0 to 2, giving him access to Beat Cop level 2, Guard Dog level 2, both incredible cards that recur infinitely, and also just good cards like Machete, Enchanted Blade, and Survival Knife level 2 for killing dudes with the actually user actions. Well, not so much on the Survival Knife, I suppose. So he has great access to fighting methods, some of which want to be recurred. He has great access to Soak to recur. If you want some more, you can run things like Cherished Keepsake and Leather Jackets for literally infinite free recursion of health. His mythos stats are base 3/3 and Survivor, where you have access to things like Sparrow Mask to just boost it to 5/5 effortlessly. And sure, the mythos tests weren't going to kill you, but as I've said repeatedly, passing mythos test is more than staying alive. Being mythos immune is not just having a million soak. And William Yorick can easily become not quite mythos immune, but incredibly mythos resilient, like as close to immune as you can get without me calling you immune. So between all the damage he deals without taking a test, the fact he just doesn't care about the mythos phase, the fact that he's more reliable than almost anyone else at finding his weapons thanks to short supply, yeah, it's just absolutely cracked. William Yorick's incredible. Next up, we have a character where I'm on the fence about them. I'm gonna play a truly min-maxed, brutal efficiency version of Daisy Walker very soon. And that's because Daisy Walker is a character where people have been like, how are they worse than Rex? How are they worse than Harvey? You'll notice we haven't ranked them yet. And to some degree, I see where they're coming from. Daisy's ability to draw extra cards with her ability is analogous to Harvey, even though it requires setup. Her extra cards drawn and extra actions taken do amount to more clues, making her analogous to Rex. The fact she doesn't start with this in play, and the fact she needs opening experience spent on it, and the fact she doesn't have the team support of Harvey's ability, all of that does matter, and I think holds her down compared to some of the other absolutely top tier Seekers. However, make no mistake, Daisy's fucking crazy. She has 3 and 2 in Mythos, total of 5, that's terrible. She also has Ward of Protection, Promise of Power, able to build into higher education, able to use all the cheap Soak allies and Seeker if she wants to. It's just not a problem she really struggles to solve, but it is worth noting her Mythos stats are not very good because it's the only problem she has. The most disgusting thing she can do by far is the Grim Memoir Ravenquill Abigail combo, where once per turn, you're going to use your free action, investigate with Grim Memoir, then get a second secretless free use off of Abigail. Then you investigate again with Grim Memoir, triggering the Ravenquill, readying Abigail, using Abigail a second time, and for effectively 1 action and 2 secrets, you get to investigate at +2 and draw a card 4 times. Which is a massive amount of compression for very little investment. Like, you'll have this in scenario 2 guaranteed. The moment you have both Grim Memoir and Abigail Foreman, Daisy becomes crazy. But for the part of the scenario before that, she is notably worse than the other Seekers, and that matters a lot. She is by no stretch of the imagination weak. I'm worried I'm underranking her, and I have her in my top 10 investigators. But she is incredible. The amount of compression you get out of Grim Memoir, Abigail Foreman, and Ravenquill is just crazy. But speaking of crazy, let's talk about Parallel Ashcan Pete and his ridiculous fucking guitar, right? The guitar basically says, we will not be overwhelmed by enemies. You start off with a method of enemy negation in play. Kaimani does that. Kaimani has to take multiple tests with values. Ashcan Pete uses a lightning bolt and just says it happens. It doesn't roll any dice. There's no roll to busk with the guitar. No, you have to actually do stuff on other characters. It just happens with Parallel Pete. The guitar is almost the entire reason Parallel Pete is an S tier. The rest of the deck a Parallel Pete plays, you can do some really cool stuff with him. You have a lot of cool enemy management with your ability to recur traps. You have a lot of like interesting difficulty 0 clue finding stuff to make a very janky flex character out of it. And there's enough deck slots left that you can actually afford for some very good action compression with things like Safeguard and some very powerful team support with stuff like Obsidian Mirror and Tetsuya. There are just good things you can cram into a Parallel Pete deck to play a very powerful, very good support flex character that would either be like high in B tier or low in A tier. And then you start with the guitar and we go to the moon, because it turns out that if you specialize in putting traps on a location, being able to just throw guys into the traps is really good. If you draw a non-hunter enemy in the Mythos deck you know ahead of time, doesn't interact with them, like if it's a cultist, you have a problem. If it is a Flora enemy in Hemlock Vale, you have a problem. But for the vast majority of non-hunter enemies in the game that are not specifically in the cultist set, if you just throw them off your location, they're basically dead. Nothing else happens. So the guitar says lightning bolt, kill the enemy, surprisingly frequently. It also generates money, that barely fucking matters. The guitar is crazy. The rest of the deck's pretty good, but the guitar is crazy, and its synergies with the rest of the deck can't really be overstated. I have seen Ashcan Pete throw dynamite that killed 5 enemies multiple times in one campaign. I have seen Parallel Petes that just carry their weight on clues while effortlessly killing half the enemies on the map. Killing in air quotes, because I didn't kill a single one of them. But Parallel Pete is just genuinely insane, and I probably am underranking him. But the characters above this, just like I was saying with Daisy, absolutely insane, progressively more deranged, dreamt up by the mind of a lunatic. And yeah, that's Rex Murphy. Rex Murphy is the least interesting character in S tier by a country mile, but it turns out getting an extra clue with no criteria. You don't have to draw a book, you don't have to move to a location, you just get the clue if you take the test at big number, and Seeker is great at big number. He has 3/3 Mythos stats, and you are completely safe to build your Rex for pure Mythos resilience. You can just cram those Mythos cards like 2 Promise of Power, 2 Sparrow Mask. You're safe to the Mythos, you did it. You don't need any additional compression, Seeker has it covered. If you just build big book stat Rex with generically good action compression cards like Pathfinder, using your flex cards to make you immune to the Mythos, you will find that you steamroll every scenario of the campaign. Full disclosure, I think most Seekers are better than Rex in Scenario 5. I'd rather have Kate, I'd rather have Ursula, I'd rather have Men. In Scenario 5, all of those things are true. God, I'd rather have Daisy by a country mile in Scenario 5. But in Scenarios 1 through 3, Rex is either better than or equal to every other Seeker. And realistically, it's only because I said 1 through 3. In Scenario 1, Harvey might tie with Rex. Everyone else is worse. And again, I really, really value being resistant to the Mythos deck because it's the only thing that can stop you from winning, and being good in Scenario 1 and 2 because those are the hardest scenarios where experience hasn't broken your deck in half. And Rex does both of those things better than almost every other Seeker. Anyway, let's talk about some good wholesome fighters that are entirely balanced and have no problems, like Tony Morgan. Tony Morgan is completely and totally not okay. His ability is that over the course of a scenario, he gets minimum 6 free resources and 6 free actions. You'll get them when you want them the most, so don't worry about the win, it'll happen. His star gives him access to more, his guns give him access to more, but basically 6 free actions and 6 free resources is just more than enough. If you've played scenarios before, you tend to know when you want to deal out these bounties. And you can actually get more than that if somehow someone lives for more than a turn with a bounty on them, but that doesn't usually happen. His 5 and fists combined with a rogue card pool that was built for every other rogue only having 3 fists means that he does disgusting things with those weapons. In Rogue, there are some very powerful things available. You might look at his Mythos stats and his Horror Soak and say, this is worse than Tommy and Roland, shouldn't you be scared? Tommy and Roland don't get to run Lonnie Ritter alongside Heavy First, giving him literally infinite soak. Tommy and Roland don't get to run a big money deck, using Well Connected, to actually pass every Mythos check with complete ease. Tommy and Roland both claim they're gonna try to find some clues with their 3 in book. If you have a fully assembled big money combo in Tony, then you have 5 action turns with 5 in book when you're fully set up, and you can just fucking clear locations because there's no enemies left because you already killed them all. Tony's absolutely cracked. His only weaknesses right now are that he can be a little bit frail during setup, and that, yeah, that's it. I will note in Scenario 1, if you build with Knuckle Dusters, that is scary as hell, because you aren't using anything that's going to make you safe with Knuckle Dusters yet. You're much, much better once you have Underworld Market tutoring a Switchblade. Scenario 1 is like the only thing that's moderately scary, but just like use worse weapons than Knuckle Duster and accept that like you don't want to take the random chance to die on Nux because it's terrifying. I have not a single criticism of Tony. He is absolutely wild. He demolishes his role. He has no team support. He's not going to help you with anything unless you want him to help you find clues, in which case he probably can help you with that. But in my experience, Tony has never actually gotten to do anything with his 5 actions and 5 book in terms of finding clues. Maybe he'll get a couple in a given scenario. And the reason for that is because every time Tony comes to a campaign at my table, everyone else, no one discusses it. No one says anything. They just all silently decide that they will not be helping me fight at all. They're like, oh, you're bringing Tony. I'm gonna go ahead and cut Occult Lexicon right now. Just like they all silently decide to cut every single fighting card from their deck. And it's fine. Tony just kills all the enemies, no problem. It does take up pretty much my entire game to 3-man fight, But just like Nat Cho, not only can you 3-man fight, you will reliably do it without problem. Unlike Nat Cho, where the mythos is your Achilles heel, Tony Morgan can very easily be built to just not really give a shit about the mythos. He's an absolute tank. Which brings us to, I think, the newest character on the list. I could be wrong about that. Parallel Father Mateo. Specifically, Parallel Front Vanilla Back, because I don't really see much incentive to use the Parallel Back. Originally, the main strong thing that Father Mateo did was use Rite of Seeking with Favor of the Sun. Favor of the Sun is now printed on Father Mateo's card, except it's better because it puts the Blessed token back in the bag. I had it pointed out to me that Father Mateo doesn't even need to be on a Blessed team, because you can just seal a Blessed token on yourself and not use it the first turn. And then every turn after, you use it and immediately reseal it to keep it safe on you so none of your teammates can throw it away. So really, you just need like one person on your team to play Attempt Fate. And then you have a Blessed token for the rest of the game. This isn't even like assuming Father Mateo's in a Blessed team. It's just assuming Father Mateo's on a team. He gets to pass one test a turn. He can pass a test that is a 6-head test, a 5-book test, a 4-fist test, or a 5-foot test, guaranteed every turn, considering that he is a Mystic with access to Mystic 5 cards like Rite of Seeking and Clairvoyance. It turns out that just guaranteeing you pass for a 3-clue action every round is an insane amount of tempo. With Clairvoyance level 0, you are guaranteed to pass a 6-shroud location without taking backfire damage, with no other assets in play. There are almost no scenario or encounter test in the game that Mateo will fail. He's just absolutely ridiculous. And the craziest thing is that he's not going to be the highest ranked investigator in the game. There's other stuff going on in his deck, obviously. You have like All McBride, you have the ability to recur Spectral Razors, you have a really good ward of Voice of Ra if you're playing in a Blessed team. You have all the generically good Mystic stuff because you're effectively playing the same game as 5-head Mystics, just better. There's other stuff going on in the deck, but none of it really matters that much. All that really matters is the one guaranteed pass per turn is absolutely ludicrously valuable, because if one of the things you can take a test on is getting 3 clues, like 3 clues per round guaranteed is actually a ludicrous rate. Most cluevers fall beneath that. That is the floor in Father Mateo's Parallel. He's insane. He's incredibly good. And I'm gonna take a second to talk about the remaining characters in the list before we go to them, because as I've talked about Father Mateo, he's truly insane. The characters above Father Mateo, with one exception, are all characters that have meaningful team support or also do not take tests. They are, generally speaking, 3 out of 5 of the remaining characters are characters with massively powerful support abilities, and that's why they're outranking Father Mateo, because Father Mateo really doesn't give a shit about his teammates. Same as Tony, same as most builds of Rex. I will note that Rex can easily be built to be one of the best support characters in the game because you just get enough clues baseline and then you play support seeker stuff, but I think that's notably worse than the crazy proactiveness of these 2 characters. No, the people at the top of this tier list are people with either insane support abilities or who are just proactively broken in a way that even Parallel Father Mateo are not. So let's get into it with what I think might be the last hot take of the tier list. Most people would not put Mark Harrigan this high on their tier list. And to that I say, play him with Bestow Resolve, get on it. Bestow Resolve and Mark Harrigan's absolutely crazy. Bestow Resolve makes Mark Harrigan an incredible support character. I will note, most high-ranking fighters, Will Yorick is almost able to 3-man fight. I wouldn't quite put it on him. I'd bring some support on your other characters. Mark Harrigan cannot 3-man fight. Tony easily does it. Nat easily does it. I would not make Mark 3-man fight. Mark Harrigan is a character where he needs time to heal himself. If you make him 3-man fight, you gotta heal for him too. But because you don't want to put that pressure on Mark Harrigan, you want to give him the time to heal himself. It also gives him the time to play some weirder assets that other fighters might not be considering as seriously. With Sophie, anytime Mark wants to, he can take a damage to boost his stats by 2, putting him at 5-head, 4-book, 7-fist, and 5-foot. If you run Bestow Resolve and all 4 of the neutral skills, Guts, Dex, Overpower, and Perception, you can then commit any of those cards to a relevant test or bestow them to an irrelevant test and go from base 2 in your book to guaranteed success on like a scenario test that somehow no one else can take. More importantly, you can just pass any Mythos test you're given. If you're given a head test, use Sophie, use Guts. Guts wasn't in your hand, bestow Overpower. You have a teammate who's struggling on a test, give them guts, then bestow dex, right? Because bestow is not a commit during the commit part of a skill test. There's a lightning bolt window you use bestow after or before, doesn't really matter, and you commit a second card or a third or a fourth or a fifth. You can do that if you want with bestow. But generally speaking, you give somebody one relevant skill and you bestow the other for essentially promise of power ++, because if they pass, rather than adding a curse beforehand, you draw 2 cards. Additionally, running all these cantrip skills in Mark means that because Mark already drew 1,000,000 cards, you cycle your deck stupidly fast. You can draw all your cards very quickly. Mark Harrigan with Bestow Resolve is a character that reliably just uses every copy of Soothing Melody with no issues. You're going to draw your whole deck and get to do that. It's not going to be a problem. And again, because you're playing the 2-man fighter Mark, you're not trying to fight for your whole team. You have time to play these healing cards for yourself for value on these tests or on your teammates if they need them more than you. Mark Harrigan with Bestow has a ton of team support while being a rock-solid ball skewer that can easily cover 2-man fighting. You can't play him like other top-tier fighters where you're putting more fight pressure on the Mark, but you can play him as a support fighter that can take any test in the game in a way that other fighters can't. I have seen Mark Harrigan survive drawing 4 copies of Grasping Hands when he auto-failed the first one. I have seen Mark Harrigan heal teammates that should have died and still be completely fine on his own. Mark Harrigan wants breathing room in a way no other fighter does, and he excels if you give it to him. In terms of giving people breathing room though, I really think Daryl Simmons deserves to be above Mark. Daryl Simmons' ability turns Rotting Remains into max 1 damage. Just Gumption on tap neuters a tremendous number of Mythos tests where their maximum output is cut tremendously. Additionally, even in tests that deal flat amounts of damage or horror, reducing it by 2 still makes you tremendously more likely to pass that test. When I was talking about Kate, I said that Clue Dropper Kate was a good support build just because of Maelson. Clue Dropper Daryl is a much better support build because Clue Dropper Daryl is going to be actually helping you with your Mythos test using his ability, in addition to using Maelson to fix the problem. With Survivor Seeker, 5 and Book in the Clue Dropper archetype, he's still gonna crush his role. He's gonna be worse than everyone else in the S tier at finding clues. I don't make any illusions otherwise. But in terms of what he gives your team for safety, reducing the difficulty of everyone who tests at his location if they need it, removing the most dangerous Mythos card from each turn, he's just an incredible support character that makes the rest of your team so much safer. It's the opposite of what Mark does. Mark is playing a fighter that's just more than good enough to 2-man fight with ease, and he's boosting everyone else's stats while rapidly cycling his deck. Daryl's still rapidly cycling his deck, it's just unrelated, it's Seeker Survivor nonsense, and he's reducing the difficulty of his teammates' test and essentially like warding a card every turn with Maelson. Support Mark and Clue Dropper Daryl are sort of 2 sides of the same coin, where they're excelling in their role at a level that's like closer to A tier than S tier, but they have a tremendous amount of team support and utility that A tier characters doing the role at a similar level simply lack. And next up, we have Harvey Walters. Harvey is a character that I have always loved to bits. Draw is something that I love. I love consistency. It's incredibly important to me. Harvey has the most draw, and he can give the draw to his friends if they need it, which they often do, because no one else loves draw as much as me at my table. If you wanted to play a support Seeker, Harvey's one of the better options. I have played support Harveys where I immediately upgraded No Stone 5 so that somebody could play a shotgun deck that ran 1 shotgun and no backup weapons. And even when you build that pure support Harvey to just get someone else to play a crazy gimmick deck, you still play a very solid game where you have decent Mythos stats and great book. But when you play Harvey proactively, the game starts to fall apart. He has very, very strong tempo decks where you just burn your cards as fast as you can and do gross stuff with Archaic Glyphs. In my opinion, the strongest deck for him by far is Flex Harvey, utilizing the 2 potentially most broken fighting cards available to Seeker. I don't think Occult Lexicon is an egregious outlier in balance anymore, but I do think that if you build for it, it's one of the most obnoxious and powerful methods of fighting if you have the card draw and economy to fund it. If you just use the Occult Lexicon, you really can't generate enough resources and cards for it to not hurt your game plan a lot, but if you supplement it with something else to kill non-elite enemies, then you go to the moon. And you know what's great at killing non-elite enemies? Ravenous Myconid. Flex Harvey can utilize Ravenous Myconid alongside Farsight as like immediate core buys that make sense in his deck in a way that it doesn't for other Seekers. And you Farsight your free Investigate every turn to charge the Myconid to eat the little guys, and when elite guys show up or there's just a tidal wave of little guys and your fighter can't handle it all, then you can start busting out the Blood Rites. And this is 2 cards in the deck, right? The Farsight's technically a 3rd card in the deck. You have 27 cards in your flex deck that are just dedicated to being book-based Clover Harvey, and you're saying you're a flex character. But when we say you're a flex character, what we actually mean is you don't take a test, the enemy just dies. I played Flex Harvey, quote unquote Flex Harvey, in Dream Eaters as my most recent campaign. And Flex Harvey, to my surprise, was main Clover Harvey. Because the player who picked Gloria, I was like, hey, are you playing Flex Gloria or Clover Gloria? You're obviously not fighter, we have a Nathaniel show. Actually, it doesn't matter, either way, I'll just bring Flex Harvey, we'll be fine. It turned out the Gloria was playing pure support Gloria. They were not going to bring a single way to deal damage, and they had no intention of getting any meaningful number of clues. I would say on average, they got less than 1 location per scenario. We had a scenario that we ended before flipping the final agenda. We beat the final boss of Dreamside with tremendous amounts of time to spare. Flex Harvey steamrolled the game as the main Clover for a 3-man team, and this was not at the cost of my flex abilities. I was eating dudes left and right. I was killing bosses with blood rights. This was 3-man cloving as the flex while still being a flex. And on this team with Gloria and Nacho and Harvey, where no one can take a foot test, you know what we did with them? We gave them to Harvey, because Harvey draws his deck so quickly that you can always have Survey the Area in your hand, testing at base 7 foot against foot treacheries, which on normal difficulty is called passing the test. Harvey is very nearly Mythos immune. He is flexing with 3 cards, and he doesn't take a test, he just kills the guys. And while doing all of this, he's basically just a fully functioning 5-book Seeker Clover. It is horrifically oppressively strong. It is not even remotely okay. Speaking of what's not okay, the Gloria on that team is arguably the more valuable character. I would say the Gloria did actually do worse than Harvey on that team, but that's a Gloria that chose to not even attempt to be proactively powerful. Gloria's Mythos mitigation is absolutely insanely broken. And rather than just super all-in committing to Mythos mitigation and massively overkilling the role, what you can instead do is play a 5-head Mystic, and you can either flex with your fighting spells and find clues with your book, or you can just play like a dedicated normal 5-head Mystic game. Because Gloria doesn't actually have to choose between mitigating the entire Mythos deck and being proactively valuable. She's a little bit behind like an Agnes Baker or a Dexter Drake. She'd be like low A tier, high B tier. Maybe a little bit beneath Akachi if you just judge her as like how is she proactively. But then like, you know, on top of that, she turns the Mythos deck off. And I mean, my most recent video was me talking about Gloria. I'm over it. She's broken. She's broken in the worst possible way too, because every game, not only does the interesting stuff not happen, you have to have this little powwow, you all huddle up and you start talking about who gets what card, and it just drags the game out. And it's not like it's a close game that's gonna be fun. Gloria's there, you're gonna win. But putting Gloria anywhere other than the top 3 would be lunacy to me. I can't imagine placing her lower than 3rd. And I'm shocked I'm putting anyone above Gloria, but it's something that's just grown on me over time. I don't think Gloria is the best character. There's only one left. I think that goes to Amanda Sharp. Amanda is absolutely crazy. The tempo of an Amanda, if you let Amanda put her nose down and play the game she wants to, is so much higher than anyone else in the game, with the sole exception of Flex Harvey. A Flex Harvey allowed to be in his element and find clues and eat people with Myconid, it's the only person who holds a candle to Clover Amanda. Amanda can do anything. You can play Red Gloved Man Vicious Blow Flex Amanda. You can make her play the jankiest fight game in the world and still succeed in your campaigns. But if you just let Amanda play a game where all she wants to do is take a 5-action turn and commit deduction 5 times, she will clear multiple locations in a single turn when she does that. And it's not like you build up all game to doing that. It's like turn 3 and turn 4 and turn 6 and turn 7 and turn 10 and turn 11. And we're not gonna get to turn 10. The game's already ended well before then. Amanda will finish scenarios with multiple agendas left. It's not remotely close to okay. The amount of tempo an unmitigated Amanda has is insane. When Amanda is not told to explore, she's not told to take a scenario test, she's not told to go help with fighting, you just let her commit deduction 5 times a turn, she just breaks the pace of the game by such a comical margin. She has so much draw because of her ability combined with unrelenting and perception and just being a seeker on top of that. She has so much clue finding impression with deduction, just duplicating these skills is absolutely wild. She'll have one turn where she draws a million cards, one turn where her weakness messes her up, and then 2 turns where she goes off with deduction. That's the 4-turn cycle. You might have an additional turn at the very start of the session, and then after that, it's basically gonna be that 4-turn cycle over and over and over again until the map runs out of clues. Usually, that's gonna be around turn 9. Usually, there's not enough clues left on the map because either the map's just out already or you had teammates helping you on a bigger map. And while Gloria does cancel, you know, a lot of Mythos cards every turn by effectively assigning them to people who are not threatened by them, Amanda Sharp cancels, let's say you end on turn 9. That seems like a low-end estimate, considered what I've been saying. Let's be super cynical. You end on turn 11, and the scenario was 16 Doom long. That's not a particularly long or short scenario. That seems middle of the pack to me. Cool. You canceled 5 times players' Mythos cards. That's comparable to Gloria. Not only does she destroy her role, she does it to such a ridiculous degree, there's just not enough time for the Mythos deck to kill anyone because you don't draw enough cards. And you might think, oh, but she has base 2s and that's dangerous, isn't it, for the Mythos phase? No, you draw your whole deck, promise of powers in your hand, you're fine. Amanda's broken. Amanda's comically broken to the point that I think she's genuinely more powerful than Gloria. Which brings us to the end of the tier list. This is my current best understanding of the Investigators as of the end of 2024 before the Drowned City comes out. I love this game. I hope you enjoyed hearing me ramble about it for nearly 3 hours while recording. Let's hope we can edit that down a good bit. Anyway, let's wrap this up. If you made it this far, then thank you for your time. Please hit all the buttons to make the algorithm happy. Yell at me in the comments about what you think I got wrong and drive engagement up. And a massive thank you to everyone who supports this channel, both as patrons over on Patreon and here on YouTube as channel members. I've been Rather Incoherent, and I'll see you all in the next one.